Okay, it says I am live. It's usually like a 60-second delay, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was always fun.
Okay, people should start. Here we go. People are filing in right now. We are 10 minutes early, but I let anybody know to come in, test your audio and your visual to make sure you're ready for the class.
What's the hashtag again?
HB intensive. Awesome. We have 7 people in here right now. Hey guys. I see you in the chat box. I'm on here a few minutes early. I'm just testing out the audio and the visual to make sure that you can see me and you can hear me. We don't want any issues throughout the class. So now is the time to check, then go get a coffee or a water or whatever you need to be comfortable. So just let me know in the chat box that you can see me and you can hear me, and we will be rolling out in about 8 minutes. So excited. I have a live studio audience here, guys. I'm really excited. Bring on the men, as I say. It's all men watching right now, which is kind of a little bit weird, but whatever. My husband's here, so it's not too weird. But hey, if you just jumped into the room, we are testing audio and visual, making sure that you can see me and you can hear me. So just pop it in the chat box and let me know, like, yes, I see you, great quality, I can hear you fine. Just want to make sure that we get that out of the way before the class begins. Awesome. Courtney says good to go. Brandy says yes. Awesome. Hello, Alina. This is going to be so fun, guys. I'm pretty unfiltered in these things, so I apologize in advance for things that I say that I probably shouldn't say.
Say it all.
I'm going to say it all. Honesty hour. Taylor, got you, girl. Anybody that just popped in, we are testing audio and we're testing visual. Make sure that you can see me and you can hear me. So just pop it in the chat box. Let me know that you see me, you hear me, your audio is good, your visual is good. We will be starting in about 6 minutes. So go get whatever's going to make you happy for this class. Make sure you've got a notebook to take some notes. Get your coffee ready because we're going to slay right there, pun intended. Get some water. Hey, it's noon. If you need some wine, go for it. Do whatever is going to make you most comfortable here. We will have little breaks throughout, but they're very short breaks. So just make sure that like you're ready to roll. Okay, awesome. Lauren sees me, hears me. Let me know that you can see me and you can hear me. We are going to have a fun afternoon together, guys. I hope you're excited because I'm excited. Hey, Emma. Oh. Y'all are so quiet.
You're testing audio.
I know, but still.
Don't talk, but you're going to keep quiet.
Well, you can talk if you want. Like, I want you guys to have a good time. I have a live studio audience. I'm not talking to myself in this room. Melanie can see me and hear me. Awesome. Good. Gianna sees me, hears me perfectly. Pumped. We were checking before. I think this is an all-female class. Usually. Well, men is a live studio. I brought the men in for the live studio audience, but I think all of you in the chat box are female. Maybe you're not. Let me know if you're not. I read everybody's names. Okay. Awesome. Carly says she can see me. Awesome. We are testing audio and visual for people that just popped into the class. Jump into the chat box. Let me know that you can see me and you can hear me. We want to get all those issues out of the way. Someone just asked what kind of coffee I'm drinking. Straight black. It's all black right there. Okay. Roxanne says, hi. Awesome. Gianna says, thanks to whoever helped sponsor me. We had so many sponsorships this time, which was so cool to see other strangers paying for strangers riding intensives. So I'm pumped about this class because generosity has been through the roof. Awesome. If you just popped in, let me know that you can see me and you can hear me before the class begins. We're going to be starting in about 5 minutes. And so we just want to make sure that you can see, hear, have no issues with that, because once we start rolling, it's going to get intense pretty quickly. That's why it's called an intensive. And I don't want you to get left behind. I don't know why anybody lets me do this. I say the dumbest stuff. No, hashtag no rider left behind. That was good. Anybody that wants the hashtag, it is HB intensive. That's where we're tweeting. That's where we're Instagramming. I didn't mean it that way. I haven't changed my name yet, guys. Anybody just popped into the class? We're already off to a strong start. Let me know that you can see me and you can hear me. I want to make sure that your audio is good, your visual is good. I think in the 7 intensives that I've done, I must have said that statement probably 2,000 times now.
That's not a bad statement.
Just want to make sure you guys are all set. I'm so pumped.
Because people let you know that they can't see you or hear you. Or they see you or they hear you.
We got that chat box for you guys to be hanging out, chilling, enjoying your time. Valerie says she got me loud and clear. Awesome. I'm going to check my email really quick to make sure we got no one in there trying to figure it out. We're going to be rolling out in just a minute. The amount of times I clap to myself is embarrassing. I'm just so excited. I feel like new energy, and I think it's because I'm drinking so much water these days. If anybody wants a free fun tip before we start the riding intensive, I've been drinking so much water, like literally so much. And it's because of this app called Plant Nanny, where basically you get this little digital plant, and every time you drink water, you feed the plant. And I'm telling you, it's actually working. What? It's kind of like chia, but like you want to see my plant, it's thriving. I'll show everyone my plant. Just wait for it.
Sounds like a Tamagotchi.
It's kind of like a Tamagotchi, which I was obsessed with as a young girl. So you can see right there, that's my plant, guys. Just an incentive for you to drink more water.
It's a very pretty plant.
Okay. Anyone that just joined in, I was giving you a free tip on how to drink more water. Gives you a lot of energy. I feel ready to go. We are about to start the riding intensive. Just want to make sure that you can see me and you can hear me. So pop in the chat. Let me know that you can see me and you can hear me. We're going to be starting in about a minute, guys. So get ready. Get your coffee. Get your Keurig, Chemex, pour over, whatever. Maybe you're at a coffee shop. This chat box is for you guys. So hang out, chat. I am going to warn you in advance. Have a notebook ready because lots of notes are going to be flying at you. So a lot of times during the class, the chat box gets quiet because there is a lot of notes being taken. But I love when you pop in there and you let me know what you like or what you resonate with. And that's also a box for you guys to ask your questions so that at the end of the class, we are able to dig into the question and answers. So awesome. People are letting me know that they can see me and they can hear me. Pop into the chat box. Let me know where you're coming from. Let each other know where you're coming from. Are you coming from Canada? Are you coming from Kansas? We want to know. We're getting started in 1 minute. Anybody that just popped in at 12:01, we are testing audio and visual to make sure that you can see me and you can hear me. The intensive is about to begin. That's the last announcement I'm going to make. I feel like I am a Delta flight attendant right now. Make sure you... No, I'm gonna stop now. Awesome. We got someone coming from Nova Scotia, small town Indiana. Carrie's from Frankfurt, Germany. Carrie, I was just telling Lane that I want to learn how to read my book in German so that I can learn to read German. So, hey, Alabama. We got the Bahamas here. We got Missouri native, Washington, D.C., This is awesome, guys. Tuscaloosa, Northern California. Awesome. I love this. Charlotte, North Carolina. We got Georgia in the house. Another DC. Love this. Chicago, Mississippi, born and raised. Oregon, LA, Colorado Springs, Kentucky with your 2-month-old. Congratulations. Birmingham, San Diego, Grand Rapids. Man, we are all across the map today. Okay, y'all, it's time to dig in. Are you ready for this? We are about to start the writing intensive. So I'm going to get the screen share going, and then we are going to Rhode Island. Yes, Birmingham. I'm so excited to be spending my afternoon with you guys. Okay, let's do this. The chat box that you can see the presentation, the summer writing intensive presentation. I'm going to be walking you through everything, but this is a PDF just so that you guys have it. And you will also be getting this after the class. So just let me know that you can see the presentation, but you can also hear my voice before we get started. There is a 60-second delay, so I'm just waiting for the comments to show up. Awesome. Somebody says yes. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, you guys are rad. See my face for these few points because I'm going to introduce myself, so it feels a little weird to like introduce myself and not have you see me, and then I'll turn the presentation on. So I'm so excited that you guys are here for the summer writing intensive. This is our 7th one, I believe, and so my live studio audience comes to every intensive. It seems as though they've been at maybe all 7 of them. And so just a little backstory on how this even started or began. I pretty much said I was never ever going to teach a class on writing, and here I am. But I'd always thought, like, what could I possibly say about writing? Like, how could I teach somebody to become a better writer? I was very kind of against the idea, and I was reached out to by a company called the Influence Network, and they were like, we want you to do an hour-long class on writing. I said yes to it because I like to say yes to challenges and things that I've not done before. And within that first week, they had to double the seats of the people that were taking the class. So I immediately was like, okay, I'm a little bit intimidated. I'm a little bit scared. I get on there, and I had an absolute blast teaching that writing intensive. And I learned that for the years that I've been writing, while I always thought like a writing class would be how you teach people to be a better writer, it's something more than that. It's actually coming down to this idea of discipline, that in order to actually sit and write, you have to do just that. You have to learn to sit down. You need to learn to put your pen to paper. You need to learn to type out the words, and you need to get into that process. And if you don't do that, then no words ever get written. And so I learned that I'm actually really good at discipline and actually love discipline. And so I figured I can teach a class on writing and also the process of discipline and everything that I've learned from the last few years. So a little bit about me. I have been self-employed for five years this summer as a writer. Pumped about that. I graduated from Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, from Connecticut, represent New England. In 2010, moved to New York City, thought that my life was going to be a scene out of The Devil Wears Prada. And I basically thought that my career was going to be in the field of human rights. That was my 5-year plan. That was my 10-year plan. And I ended up dealing with some depression while I was living in New York City. And as a method of coping for my depression, I started to write letters and leave them around New York City. At the time, I had this really small blog. The blog had started my senior year of college. I think I had like maybe 100 readers. I'm not really sure. And on that blog, I basically said, hey, I'm leaving letters around New York City. If you want a letter for whatever reason, I'll write to you. And I watched my inbox explode with letter requests from people all over the world. It was a really defining moment for my life because it realized like, whoa, there's something that I have to do here. But I also started to see the needs of humanity in a way that I had never seen them before. So it really personalized the blog that I was writing, that I realized I was writing to single mothers, and I was writing to people battling cancer, and I was writing to people that were moving across the country for people that they loved. And that like the people that I was writing to were really tough cookies. And so I defined my audience. I kept blogging. The letters kind of blew up, took on their own life. I started an organization called More Love Letters. That led to doing a speaking engagement, a TED Talk, that then led to talking with literary agents and working on my first book that came out in 2015. So this is the book. If you find this letter, I wrote this baby. I loved writing it. And I realized during that, like, I definitely feel like I am made to write books. But throughout that, I also learned discipline of maintaining a blog. I've been blogging for nearly 8 years this November, and that is my biggest priority and my favorite thing about anything that I've ever created is that blog. I started copywriting for different clients, so I'm well-versed in writing copy for clients, about pages, different things that clients need to find their voice. I know that one of my clients is here in the class today. Hey, Melanie. And I've just kind of learned and dug into all the different styles of writing, which lead me to here, to the summer writing intensive, to you guys, me hanging out. I did sell my second and third book the week before my wedding, so it was kind of crazy in December. I just finished writing book 2, and the edits are coming back on Monday, so you guys are my last breath of fresh air before I go back into my writing hole, and I'll finish up those edits and then start working on book 3. We do not currently know what book 3 is about yet, but if you guys have any suggestions, let me know because I'm open to talking about it. But yes, I hate introductions because I hate talking about myself, but I got that out of the way, and now we can finally dig into the course material. But I always think it's good to introduce yourself because then people know where you're coming from and where your experience comes from and where your credibility comes from. So now I'm going to do the proper screen share. Here we go. Say goodbye to my face for a little while. No, it's good. I just got over a sinus infection, so if I'm sniffling a little bit, bear with me. Flannery O'Connor, she's my girl. I love this quote. It says, "I write only because there is a voice within me that will not be still." And so I feel like that's a lot of the reason why maybe you signed up for this class, why you're coming here, is that there's something inside of you that's saying, I want to write, or I've been writing for a while and I want to get to that next level, or I think I have a book inside of me, or I think I have a blog inside of me. One of those are probably the reasons why you came here today and you showed up today, because you have something that you want to say. And so this class is going to be great for developing discipline. It's going to be great for the process of storytelling and really figuring out what your voice is. I think we want to hurl ourselves out into the world and like share our voice without even knowing what our voice is. Like, what are the things that we care about? What are the things that matter to us? What are the things that matter to our audience? And so hopefully what I can do is help you hone that and develop that and dig deeper throughout this class. So be sure to be popping it in the chat box to let me know that you're out there, that you're engaging. You will be getting a recording of this class. So if at any point people need to duck out, you will get it about an hour after the class finishes. Also, post this class, I was meant to say earlier, you will be invited into an alumni group of people that have been through this writing intensive before, so that you'll get some community, you'll get to hang out with one another. And I definitely encourage you, engage in the chat box. If you find somebody that you're like, whoa, you're my soul sister, you're resonating with me, exchange emails, keep this relationship going after the intensive closes. And if you want to be tweeting or using any kind of Instagram, HB Intensive is the hashtag. Okay, so here we go. Purpose of the class. I share one classic story every single time that I open out any class. It's kind of like the tradition. I feel like the old grandfather that shares the story over and over again. But it really has defined the reason why I teach the way that I teach. And so several years ago, I went on a camping trip with my friend Nia, and Nia and I had never camped before. So for some reason, we thought it was really great to go out alone and figure this out by ourselves. It was definitely the coldest month of the year, or the coldest weekend of the year in Georgia. We went up to the North Georgia mountains. We had this little camp that I am certain was like a 1942 World War II tent. It could barely even fit us inside of it. And we also didn't know how to light a fire. So we basically brought a little baggie of lint and we're like, okay, this is what we're going to use to light a fire. And so we show up there and we show up accidentally past the time when the sun went down. And so we had one working headlamp and we were trying to set up camp. And we brought some stuff out to the campsite. We walked back out to get more stuff, and we came back and there was a Maglite flashlight sitting in the middle of the campsite. And if you watch Lifetime movies just as much as I do, you know that's the point where a murder is probably going down. But we found out a few minutes after that this flashlight belonged to a man that was in the campsite next to us. So we realized we only had one headlamp. We were probably going to need some help. Later on, after we set up that jankety tent, he came back and he actually started our fire for us. And later on in the evening, he came back and he replenished the fire. And then he invited us over to his fire. And in the morning when we woke up, he had already started our fire again and he had made us coffee. So at this point, single Hannah was like, I definitely need to marry this guy. But I didn't. And I always say that he was kind of like a angel from like that show, Touched by an Angel. Any Roma Downey fans in here? Because he had two first names. And so I just always believed that angels have two first names. I don't know where I got that from, but I always share it as part of the story. All that to say, we have our coffee, we get up, we go for a hike, and when we come back, the man is gone. He is nowhere to be seen. And we realized shortly after, probably about an hour and a half after that, that we needed to pack up and we needed to leave as well. Because in all the time that the man had built our fire and replenished our fire, he never once taught us how to actually build the fire for ourselves. And I think that that is the issue with the world that we're living in sometimes, that we are so consumed with building our own fires that we never stop to say, hey, here's how you actually build a fire so that somebody else can learn to build a fire too. And so my purpose when I teach these classes is not so that you guys can be inspired by me, not so that you can look at my life and want to follow along with it. I want to give you guys the tools to build your own fires because I think every single one of us can agree that the world that we're living in feels a little bit of dark, feels a little bit of crazy sometimes, and that we could benefit from fires. Absolutely. More fires. And so right now, you're in a writing intensive, but you're also in a fire building class because I am adamant about giving you tools, not inspiration. I think inspiration is great, but I think action steps are the things that actually change us. And my goal is that you would take this class and then you wouldn't have to take 6 more classes after this, but you would have the tools to become disciplined, to go out in the world and do what you need to do. So welcome to Fire Building 101. I'm just hoping to gear you guys up with a ton of action steps. That's why I say always have a notebook ready because you're going to be taking a lot of serious notes. And we are going to dig into what is considered the first part of this class. So we are going to spend some time talking about the process of writing. We're going to break for a few minutes. We're going to get into the storytelling part of writing. We're going to break for a few minutes. Then we're going to get into a lightning round of branding and an extended question and answer. So I'm excited that you guys are spending your Saturday with me. I promise that it will be as intense as it is when you name a class a writing intensive. That's why I didn't call it a writing class, because it's actually super intense. And anybody in the live studio audience can attest to that. So get ready and let's dig into the process of writing and the actual nitty-gritty of it. And so we're going to have some rapid fire points coming at you. So this is where I recommend you got the pen ready. Okay, point number one, stop sleeping with liars. This is what I always start with no matter what, because I think the first thing that we need to get out of the way is the fact that a lot of us go to sleep every single night sleeping with these so-called liars. These are the liars that tell us that you can't do this, that you shouldn't have signed up for the class, that you shouldn't be sitting here today, that this isn't going to make a difference, that you can't put your voice out there. And every single one of us deals with those liars. They're the liars that tell us on repeat what we can and cannot do. And I think sometimes we give them way too much credit and we allow them to stop us from doing things that we were meant to do. So some of you sitting in this class today, like, you know full well who those liars are and what they tell you every single day. And you've listened for far too long. And some other people were like, I didn't even think that I was going to come to this class because I was so afraid of not fitting in or not being good enough for the class. And these are liars that actually sound a lot like truth, and we begin to believe them. It reminds me of the time that one time I started a garden, which was not a good thing at all because I'm not a gardener at all, and the only thing I can keep alive is a digital plant. But I started a garden, and I got this guy from church to like build me this beautiful garden, and I was so excited like 2 weeks later because like I had all these plants growing, and I'm like, my plants are growing faster than anybody else I know that has a garden. Well, come to find out that my plants were actually weeds and that I didn't know that I had to weed the garden. And that's an essential step. And the same thing happens for your brain, that if you aren't careful, there will be these lies that are going to take foothold in your brain, and they are going to become bigger and larger than you ever hoped that they would be because you didn't pull up the weed. And so I want this class to be about addressing those liars, the things that are holding you back, and learning to start telling them no and learning to dispel them with real truth so that you can sit down at the desk and do what you need to do. Point number 2, look up and show up. I think that this is so essential for writers of this world, that I used to think that to be a really good writer, I needed to be really good at living inside of my head and concocting stories. Now, I think that is an element of writing, but I've since learned that being a really good writer, especially if I want to write nonfiction or if I want to continue to write nonfiction on my blog, it requires that I go out into the world, that I live a good and solid life, that I learn to be good to other people, and then I come back and I write it down. And this is really hard in the world that we're living in because we don't like to do a lot of looking up, and we then find it harder to show up for people. We're living in this age where everything is happening on a screen, where we can just scroll and like our friends' photos, and we can classify that as showing up. But I always say in my classes that investigating someone's life is not the same as investing in someone's life. The two are very different. And so us sending a text or us sending a tweet to check up on somebody is not the same as us showing up to their house with tea or soup or getting dinner with them and asking them the tough questions, not just the how are you, but the how are you really? And so looking up and showing up have been completely vital to me because I realized that people have really great stories inside of them, and that if we can't learn the traits of humanity and how we interact with one another, how is there going to be reality infused into the words that we write? If we're always living in our head, then everything is romantic, and I don't think that that's actually life or reality or how we react to one another when stuff hits the fan or when betrayal happens or when forgiveness is needed. And so whenever I say look up and show up, I always think about my mom, and my mom has this thing where sometimes my mom is the most awesome human ever. But she has this thing where sometimes if she's bored, she likes to go to the airport and she likes to watch people coming home at the arrivals part of the airport. So even if she's picking me up from the airport, she'll show up extra early so she can watch people coming home because she just loves to see those embraces and those interactions. And so I always tell people, like, if you are lost for inspiration, the number one thing you can do is pack up your little backpack and go off to the airport and watch people coming home. And that will give you more material that you need for weeks on end than anything else. So look up and show up. Be there for the people in your lives. Be mindful of putting down your phone so that you can see the things happening around you. I promise you that whatever is happening on the phone, social media wise, it's going to be there when you get back. And even if you take a break, you're going to realize you didn't miss anything while you were gone. Number 3, find others who want you to win. I don't know why this is so difficult for myself, for other people. For some reason, we like to surround ourselves with people that maybe don't want to see us win. They're the naysayers. They're the people that say, well, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if you can actually do that thing. And we love to listen to their voices and make them louder than the voices that want to cheer us on and want to push us forward. And so I always say, find others who want you to win. Find the people that they're there, they show up. Like, for instance, my live studio audience, these people here, they show up for every writing intensive, and I don't know why they do, but they clearly want to see me win, which is amazing, and I'm thankful for that. But surrounding yourself with people that are positive and people that want to keep you accountable to goals. That's why I love the chat box. You can be open and vocal in this chat box if you're like, listen, I'm not surrounded by people who want to see me win. I encourage you to do that now so that other people can rally and say, hey, I want to help you win. And maybe you guys can spur some relationship on during this class and then after this class to hold one another accountable. If people don't want to see you win, if people are just, I've had some friends in the past where they like clearly had no interest in me propelling myself forward. And so they were always very negative. And I realized, like, you are the average of the people that you surround yourself with. So if you're always surrounding yourself with negative people, you may become negative too. So find a new crew, find a crowd to people that love you and adore you and are like, yeah, I do believe that you can be a writer. I see that in you. So number 4, pick a project and follow it. This is key. This is very important. We are people that we strap perfectionism to our goals. And then we also we start something and then 5 seconds later, we're like, well, I'm not really inspired by that thing anymore. So let me start something else. And I've seen this happen in my own life and in the lives of other people. I remember a few years ago that I got really big onto this minimalist kick. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to become a minimalist and I'm going to get rid of everything in my life. And then I said I was going to start a blog about it because I wanted a minimalist blog. And I remember it was my best friend, Erin, that was like, I don't think you need to start a minimalist blog. Maybe you can just blog sometimes on your blog about minimalism. And I think what she was really telling me is like, hey, just because you're inspired by something doesn't mean you need to start something new entirely. Continue to work on the thing that you've already started, the thing that you're already cultivating, and dig in deeper to make that thing even better. I see that a lot with people that are like, well, I started one blog and then I completely failed and I stopped writing on it. So I think I need to start another blog. And it might not be that you need to have another orphan blog on the internet. It might be that you have to go back to that project and you need to revive it and you need to start it over again. I'm a big advocate for not having too many orphan projects on the internet. Blogs that are not tended to, things that get started and then we don't follow through with them. Sometimes I think the best thing that we can do is when an idea pops up, let it sit in the back of your mind for 2 months. 3 months. If it's still there, if you're still passionate about it, then start it. Then start following it. But being careful to be disciplined to say, I started this thing and I'm going to commit to see it finished. Number 5, all the crappy drafts. This is huge because a lot of us don't even start writing our drafts because we are scared of them not being perfect, because we think like, oh my goodness, that first draft is always dreaded and it's always awful. But that's the thing about the first draft. It's meant to be crappy. It's Anne Lamott that says you need to write all of your crappy drafts, all of your crappy words. You need to get them out in the world because I promise you, the second draft is going to be even better. When I wrote that first book, I remember the day that draft came back and it was like red slashes throughout the entire book. And at first I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't actually know what to do with myself. I don't know how to cut all of these words out. I thought that it was basically like, hey, you're not a very good writer and here is proof in all these red slashes. But really what it was my editor coming and saying like, hey, I believe that you're a good writer, but I also believe that you can be a better writer. And so I want you to look at this crappy draft and I want you to make it better. And so I'm telling you guys, like, crappy blog posts, crappy things all over the place. That's what we can invest in today. Because if you don't get the words out, you'll never know what you have to say. And if you think that they're meant to be perfect on the first round, you'll never publish them. I know so many people that write tons of blog posts in their notes and on their phone and in their WordPress, and then they never press publish because they think it's not good enough. And I want to tell you, like, it's not meant to be perfect. That's not the point. The point is to get writing out there, to receive feedback from other people. If you don't want to put it out on the internet, ask a friend, ask somebody that you care about to read something of theirs. We need to embrace these crappy drafts. Number 6, evacuate the camp. We're going back to the liars because, hey, if we didn't talk about them enough, these liars are a really big deal, actually, because the liars are going to show up full force tomorrow. I know it. I've seen it happen 1,000,000 times. You're taking this class right now. You're writing a bunch of notes. You're feeling really excited. You're like, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm on fire. I'm ready for this. This whole day is going to be a writer's high for you. Like, you might start a blog. You might write 6 things. You're going to be excited. Do you hear me, Nigel? You're going to be excited. But what's going to happen after this is that you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to think, crap, where do I start? I don't know. I don't believe in myself anymore, because the liars are going to come back full force. Anytime you make a massive step towards something that you want in life, there is going to be an equal opposite force that is going to come and try to steal that from you. I believe it more than anything. I get really passionate about it because I've seen it happen in my own life. I'm on a high and then I'm in a big low. And so we're going back to the lies because I need you to be warned of them, because they're going to show up for you. So this right here is called the liar's job description. This is what I believe every lie, if a lie had a mouth, would say about us and our progress and all the things. Convince her that she cannot move forward. Convince him this new life he is praying for simply does not exist. Convince her to stand still. Convince him to settle for less. Convince her there is nothing outside this place. This word called contentment cannot actually be attained. Convince him to play small. If you can keep her from gaining courage and boldness in real life, she will be unable to propel the others forward. He will be some mumbling idiot who talks about change but never feels it on his own skin. Sure, she might be able to reach the others, but she will be unable to actually help them change their lives and find freedom too. That's the biggest thing. Convince him that he will never be free, that fear will always get the last say. Keep her living in old stories, the ones that have built ghost towns in her heart for years. Keep him from ever stepping forward, because if he steps forward, then he will figure out how to draw a map. And if he can draw a map, the others are going to leave this ghost town too. This is huge, especially for writers, because I think I thought for maybe like 4 years, 5 years of writing on my blog, that if I wrote about something on my blog and I published it to the world, that meant that I was over it. Eek, not true at all. Even if you write about something, it might not mean that you've actually done the work to get over that thing. And so what I care about more than anything, more than you writing good words, is that each of us gets dedicated to do the work that's actually required of us to actually live these lives. We live in a world where we talk a lot about the lives that we want to be living, but it's talk sometimes. And we need to be action oriented. I want to know that the life that you're living on the screen is actually the same as the life that you're living off the screen. That realness, that authenticity, that's what I hope will happen in my life, that the things that I'm writing about are actually about the work that I've done, not the things that I talk about that I haven't managed to get over in my own life. So contender number 1, liar number 1. We've talked about this a little bit, so we won't belabor the point. This needs to be perfect. It's probably never going to be perfect. And it's definitely not going to be perfect until you get other people involved in the process. Again, I'm tooting at the little chat box here because this is really a time for you to find somebody to be your writing accountability partner. So do not be afraid to raise up your hand and be like, hey, I need a writing accountability partner. If you're too scared to do it in the chat box, or if you're watching the replay, shoot us an email, info@hannahbrencher.com. We do crazy things on the internet all the time, so we will find you a writing intensive partner. We will find you somebody in the world that wants to be your writing accountability partner, so do not be afraid to send that email to us. Me and Claire will make sure that you are not left alone in this battle. But going back to that point, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's probably never going to be perfect. Even in the first book that I wrote and now the second, I look at things and I think I could have written that so much better. But that's me looking at the past rather than me moving forward. What you can do is you can look at the writing that you've done in the past, and you can allow that to turn you into a better writer in the future. So lie number 1, this needs to be perfect. We need to squash that lie. Please let me know if that's a lie that you listen to on repeat that's too loud. Contender number 2, everyone is out to get me. This is like another one that I think a lot of us believe is like, well, I can't put this out on the internet because people aren't going to support me and they're going to hate me and they're going to want to see me fail. And like we add this victim mentality to our lives that like doesn't need to be there, that we can actually be stronger and more empowered. And I want to tell you, like when I was blogging in college, like this idea, everyone is out to get me, like that wasn't a reality in my head. I never actually even believed this lie until, I kid you not, people came out to get me. There were people in my life, in my college, that did not like me writing this blog, and they made it known. There was cyberbullying. There was all sorts of things. I even shared this past week, and I turned it into a Monday morning email about the time that somebody sent me an email. It was an anonymous email, and they basically shared a link to a blog that they had created. And the blog was something along the lines of like HannahBrencherReallySucks.com. And it was literally every time that I would publish a blog post, this person would rip the blog post apart and publish it. And they did this over and over and over again. Now, I'm pretty sure no one was actually reading the blog that they had written, and they kept sending it to me in an email so that they would make sure I got the point. And I don't know what was going on in that person's life that made them so mad or so angry, but it is to say that sometimes there are going to be people that are actually out to get you, but you can't let them stop you. And even when you feel like people are out to get you, you need to do it anyway, in the sense that, are you going to let that person from college that wants to tell you how to live your life keep you from doing the things you want to do? If I had listened to the girls in college that had actually been my friends that actually turned on me and decided I wasn't going to put my voice out there, I can promise you, I would not be sitting here right now teaching you guys. I would not have written books. I would not have done anything if I actually listened to them. Anytime you put yourself out there, there's going to be some kind of adversity, some kind of animosity that's going to come at you. And I believe that it's not meant to be something that's meant to tear you apart. It's meant to thicken your skin. So in contender number 3, there's no room for me at the table. This is a lie that, I struggle with on a regular basis. I think there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of bloggers out there. There's a lot of writers out there. There's a lot of books out there. And then I think about my sweet husband, who tells me the complete opposite of it, where he's like, well, thank God that we can write thousands of books, and thank God that there can be thousands of blogs, that actually there is room for you at the table because the table is ever expanding. And we need to become people that own our stories, that say, you know what, my story is important. My story doesn't look like her story. My story doesn't look like his story. And I need to embrace my story and bring it to the table. For any time that I've ever actually been at a literal physical table at a conference or something, I'm always nervous. I'm always scared to talk. And I always find when I open my mouth and I start sharing, that's when the magic happens. That's when things actually get done. That's when I realize, like, whoa, I'm meant to be here. Like, I'm qualified to be here. And so learning to squash that lie quickly is going to be the thing that allows you to propel yourself forward and allows you to write those words, believing that your story hasn't been told and your story doesn't look like anybody else's story. Contender number 4, I'm too old or I'm too young. This is a big thing. I get people that email all the time that think like, I'm too young to have a voice. And then you get the people that I think that somewhere, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say that this is backed by research, but I think somewhere in like our 20s, we start to become a little bit more jaded, maybe a little bit more cynical. Maybe we start to think like, if I was going to do that thing, I should have done it when I was 22. And so we start to believe like, well, I'm too old to do that thing. And that time has passed. And I just know and believe that that's a lie. If anybody has ever read the book by Cheryl Strayed, Wild, which is a fantastic book. She also wrote another book called Tiny Beautiful Things, which I highly recommend. And she wrote a story in Tiny Beautiful Things about the fact that she had always believed that she was supposed to write that book Wild by a certain age. And then when that clock ran out, she thought, well, what's the point? I can't do this anymore. And she always says in her writing that your book has a birthday, but you just don't know what that day is yet. And so be mindful that, like, when you sit down to write that book and it's not feeling like it's coming out of you, or you don't feel like you have the words yet, maybe it's not time to write the thing yet. Maybe it's meant to happen 5 years in the future. Maybe it's meant to happen in 2 years. All that I know is that the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed is a fantastic book. And I don't think that it could have been written in the way that it was written, be a bestseller in the way that it was, if it hadn't been written at that exact spot in her life where she had the wisdom and the knowledge to know what she needed to know to write it down. So contender number 4, I'm too old or I'm too young. Again, it is another lie trying to keep you from standing in your place. Someone said, yes, too young to write a memoir, too old to get started. I battled with that a lot when I was writing my first book, thinking, okay, I am 24 years old. I cannot possibly write a memoir. And sometimes I even look at it and I think I would have written this completely different if I could go back and I had the chance to do it over. But at the same time, like, that book was meant to be written so that another book could be written and then another book could be written. That is what I like to call a Genesis story. And so if you hold off on your Genesis story because you feel like you're too young to do it, like, let's be corny, but like, you'll never get to Exodus or Leviticus or all the other books. So you just got to start writing. You just got to see what comes out of you. It might not be the biggest story in the world the first time you go to sit down and write, and that's okay. But if you never sit down to write, you're never going to know. Contender number 5, my story isn't good enough. I don't want to talk too much about it because we've already talked about it a little bit, and it's one of the biggest lies that hold us back, but it's this feeling like, well, my story can't be told because no one cares about my story, and my story is a sob story, or I'm a victim, or all of these things about why our story isn't good enough for us. And it's another lie. It's another thing that's just holding us back from the work that we are meant to do. There's a quote by Cheryl Strayed. It says, nobody is going to give you a thing. You have to give it yourself. You have to tell us what you have to say. I promise you, as you start to write the words, as you start to put it down on paper, you're going to realize that you don't have one story inside of you. You have a million little stories. Everything in your life will become a story if you would just dedicate yourself to the discipline of sitting it down and starting to do the work. Contender number 6, I have no time. This is a huge one, and it's usually our biggest excuse as to why we can't do this thing, we can't put it out there, is that I just don't have time. I work too much, or I have a family that I have to take care of, and I'm not in any way bashing anyone that, you know, has a really busy life or has a family or has 5 children. That's not the case here. But I have also learned from writing, from learning from a lot of writing clients, that we will look at anything to turn it into an excuse for why we don't have the time to do something. We'll do anything that we can to avoid getting up an hour earlier or staying up an hour later or not scrolling through our Instagram in order to just convince ourselves that we don't have the time. And really, if we did a layout of our lives and we wrote the things down, we would find that we're actually letting in a lot of unnecessary distractions that are keeping us from finding the time to do stuff. I would love for you guys to just go into the chat box and let me know some of the things that you know keep you from making the time, whether that's social media, whether that's like knowing, well, I could sit down and I could write today, but my coworkers are going out to get drinks, and so I'm going to go out with them too. I'm an advocate for community, yes, but I think sometimes something's got to give. You need to sit down, you need to do the work, and you need to stop making excuses. Whew, sometimes I get like a little bit like a drill sergeant when I do all of this. But number 7, Find your groove and then stick with your groove. This is a big thing for people. I find if you're anything like me, you're like that person that's like, okay, well, I found this really cool planner. And so I start writing in the planner. And then like 3 weeks later, I feel like, oh, well, I need that planner that somebody else put on Instagram, or my life won't be complete until I start this planner. And we find that especially with social media, we like want to adopt other people's grooves. We're like, oh, well, that seems to be working for them, so I really need to go and do that thing. And we never give ourselves the time or capacity to see if a thing really works for us at all or not. And so when I say find your groove, I mean like find the journals that you like to write in and then stick with those journals. Don't be the person that goes to Target and buys 7 other journals to try them out. I used to make the excuse all the time of like, well, if I'm not inspired by the journal, then I can't write in the journal. Okay, Hannah, then shut up and find a journal that inspires you and move on with your life. The same thing with pens, the same thing with planners. Stick with something longer than 3 months, longer than 6 months for you to figure out if that's your groove. Find out if you like to write in the morning or if you like to write in the evening. Find out if you are somebody who writes longhand, you write out all of your thoughts before you type it into the computer, or if you're somebody who goes right to the computer and you start writing out your thoughts. I believe it changes from time to time. I will tell you, I wrote the first book completely longhand. I wrote everything out with my hand first before I typed any of it. The second book, I wrote completely on the computer. I couldn't actually write anything down. Anytime I went to do it, it didn't work. And lately, for my blog posts, for all the things that I'm writing everything completely in Evernote. Evernote has been the most beautiful thing that's ever been introduced into my life recently. I'm going to try to stick with it. So I'm going to let you know in 6 months if that's really my groove. But your process is going to change from time to time, and that's okay. But find your groove instead of always claiming, well, the journal hasn't come along, the pen hasn't come along, the program hasn't come along. It's funny, and maybe some people in the class are people that have asked this before, but every time that I would put like the pages that I was writing for my second book up on Instagram, like I would do like a little video of like my word counts, and people always were like, what program are you using to write that in? And I would be like, it's Pages for Mac, which is like the simplest, most basic program. And a lot of times it's simple and it's basic. We don't want it to be simple and basic. We want another $100 writing class. We want another $100 tool. And really it's like, let's find your groove. Let's stick with that. You might need a pen, a paper, and a Word document. And that's all you need to really start moving. And the biggest thing is that you wouldn't look like the coolest blogger on Instagram, but that you would find your groove and you would write really great words, some that the world will see and some that the world will never see. Number 8, finding time versus making time, or making versus finding time. This is a big thing that I've noticed with a lot of people, is that we always say like, oh, well, I have to find the time. I have to find the time. But really, we're never actually going to find the time, because we're always going to find something that is going to fit better into our time frame than actually sitting down to write. So making the time is sitting, opening up your planner, hopefully the one you've had for 6 months, and finding the things that, or finding the time in which you can actually sit down and start writing. Maybe that's an hour in the mornings. Maybe that's 20 minutes every other day. I would love for you to pop into the chat box. And if you know off the top of your head, like, hey, I want to be dedicating 2 hours a week to writing, or I know that I could be writing every Monday. Let's schedule that time out during this time. I'm encouraging you in the break, if you don't need to get coffee, if you don't need to get a refill, like look at your planner and think like, okay, what is one session of writing hours that I can add to my planner, add to my time frame that I've not done before? And let me know when that's going to be so I can cheer you on, so I can push you forward. Number 9, small things on repeat. You heard? Everything is just a bunch of small things on repeat. That's all it is. We think that things are going to be like these big fireworks moments where like all of the stars align, and like it just is never that to me. It's never been that for me. And so even when I think about writing my first book, I remember that I thought that the moment that the book was done, it was going to be like this firework explosion. I thought music was going to be playing. I thought that it was just going to be epic. And what I realized when I finished writing the book is that I got up and I went and I ate a burger and I took a shower, and it was pretty anticlimactic because I realized that like there was no big epiphany moment. There was this pride inside of myself, like, wow, you were right to believe in yourself when you said that you could do really hard things. But I realized that all of the work had actually been done in small things on repeat, in sitting down and writing 1,000 words, in writing 500 words, in writing 2,000 words. All of those things stacked up, and they would only continue to stack up if I continued to do them on repeat. This is a quote from one of my blogs. It says, "You don't need a backpack to become a different person. You don't need to delete everyone in your phone to change paths. You don't need a plane ticket or a map. You simply need the will. You could actually learn to eat, pray, and love right where you are. You could figure out how to live in the skins of wilds from your own single bedroom apartment. My journey to become someone different started with one word: no. No to all the things that used to suffice in this place." And I say that because we are living in a world where we believe that the solution is elsewhere, and the job is elsewhere, and the person is elsewhere, and all the things that we want to do with our lives is just elsewhere. And we need to pack a backpack, and we need to leave, and we need to go somewhere in order to make it happen. But it could happen right here, in this moment, if we would just sit down and do the work and dedicate ourselves. I can promise you, as somebody who has been working really diligently to create content and writing off of this screen and then come back to talk about it, you will get this inner fulfillment that is unlike anything else, that is so different from the times that we post on social media because we're feeling not loved, or because we want to be seen, or because we just want to know that people acknowledge us and see us. I promise you, there will be a deeper, richer fulfillment when we actually sit down to do the work, and we do it to prove ourselves right more than proving anything that we could possibly prove on the internet. Okay, number 10. A story about buffalo. So this is the last point that we're going to get into before we take a quick 5-minute break and we come back and we start talking about the storytelling process. So I'm going to pop. Okay, so the story about buffalo, one of my favorite stories. So I got a gym membership several years ago to this really kind of sketchy, jankety gym that was right by my office space. And they gave me one of those like free, like personal trainer sessions that they always kind of sucker you into because they want you to pay for 6 weeks of that. And so I sign up for the session, and I go and I meet my trainer. And my trainer is like this man in his 40s, and somewhere while like I was on the elliptical, he was telling me that I was like so wise and intellectual that I could never marry a man who wasn't over the age of 40, which is kind of weird. And I think he was like pseudo hitting on me. I'm not sure. And so at one point while I'm on the Stairmaster, he says, "You know what you remind me of?" And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "You remind me of a buffalo." And I'm like, that's a really interesting thing to say about somebody. It's probably not the thing to say about somebody while they're at the gym and trying to get in shape. But of course, I was intrigued. I like weird things. So I was like, oh, tell me more about that. And so he starts to tell me this story about how buffalo are very different from other animals. Now, what happens when a storm is on the horizon? For us, we think, okay, a storm is coming. I'm going to go inside. I'm not going to swing, golf clubs outside because I'll get electrified. We go inside. Animals, when they know a storm is on the horizon, they run for cover. They duck. They make sure that they are hidden from the storm. Buffalo are actually very different, though. When a buffalo sees a storm on the horizon, the buffalo actually knows, I'm not getting out of this storm unscathed. I'm going to get hit by the hail. I'm going to get hit by the rain. The best thing I can do is actually run towards the storm so that I get out of it quicker. I might get hit hard, but if I run towards the storm, I'm going to exit the storm quicker than if I tried to hide from the storm. And so he told me that I was like a buffalo, and I was like, I receive that, brother. Because I think that we need to learn to be like buffalo in our own lives, that we have to realize the storm is going to hit us at some point, whether we are 21, whether we are 24, whether we are 43. We will not be spared from the storms of this life because this life is hard, plain and simple. And so instead of being people that want to hide from the storm, we could become people that want to run towards the storm, that want to say, hey, it's going to be okay if I get scars, and it's going to be okay if I get bruises, because I'm going to be able to tell the story behind those scars and bruises. It's going to make me stronger. It's going to make me better. It's going to make me more powerful. And so to me, in my life, I think bring on the storms. Come at me, storms, because that is going to be proof that there was a fight and I fought the fight. And so if I can encourage you guys, any note on humanity and writing in general, it's learning to be buffaloes. It's learning to be the people that are not afraid of the storms. They run into the storms. So that's my last point before we get into the storytelling process. There were two books that I wanted to tell you guys about. The first book is coming out in like a month and a half, so it hasn't actually come out yet. So I'm sorry, but it's the book by Jon Acuff, Finish, and you can pre-order it because it's fantastic and I recommend it. I'm halfway through it right now, but really the whole premise of the book is this idea that like we're really good at starting things, we're not so good at finishing things. And so he gets into a lot of the traps that keep us from finishing things. And one of the ones that I really loved is about this idea of like making it fun if you want to see it get done. And so, wait, can somebody grab me that candle right there? I'm going to use this as an example. So thank you. Okay, so he says that when we set goals, whether it's like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to write a blog post, or I'm going to write in general, we have this mindset that like things need to be really not fun for them to be completed. I'm not sure what that is, but like we think I should have to suffer. It's going to be really hard. And yeah, there's definitely going to be times where it's really hard, but he says like, make your goals more fun, allow yourself to enjoy it. And so he's talking about how like when he was writing this book, he loves the smell of Christmas. And so he would light this Christmas candle every time that he was writing the book, because it was that treat of like, okay, I'm sitting down to write the book, so I get to light this candle. And he said it was really cool at the end of the book because it's like, hey, like, this whole candle has been burned down, and this is proof that I did the hard thing. So I was super inspired by that, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have a Christmas candle too, and it's right here, and it smells like Christmas. And so now I'm getting my draft back on Monday, and I'm going to burn it every time that I sit down to write. But you want to know the coolest thing about this candle? Y'all, me and Lane's faces are on it. Somebody gave this to us as a wedding gift. It says to infinity and beyond. Like, we're the definition of lit right here. But yeah, so I'm going to be burning my Christmas candle all the way until Christmas, and it's going to be fun. So I loved that Jon Acuff said that. The other book that I totally recommend to you guys, I get really excited about this book, is The Power of Habit. This book changed my life in so many ways. And I want to promise you that when I started reading it, I probably got halfway through and then I stopped reading it. And I told Lane, like, I want to totally go get another book. And he's like, hey, why don't you finish The Power of Habit? Like, maybe your best habit can be actually finishing a book. And it was really good advice. And I'm telling you, the end is so much better than the beginning. It's like so good. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because I'm a big advocate for discipline, and this book really changed my life when it came to discipline and setting strong habits. So I recommend these two books to you guys in your writing process. Pre-order this baby because you will not be upset about it. It's blowing my mind and putting me in my place. So we are going to take a quick 5-minute break. We are coming back at 1 p.m. on the dot. So get your refills, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to do, and then we're going to dig into the storytelling part of the class. So we'll be back soon. Someone just asked, they couldn't see me. We're technically on a break right now. So when we're on the break, I just turn off the webcam and the microphone. So don't worry about it. I'm actually going to turn off the webcam right now, though, because I'm going to scarf down some food really quick. So don't worry. We didn't go anywhere. That's Paul. Blake is looming over. We're going to be back in 3 minutes.
It's just so right up your nose. It's all they saw.
Hey, we're back. I'm just scarfing down broccoli right now. Like, I kid you not. It's right here. So we are back and we're ready to go. I'm loving your guys' feedback. I'm loving that you guys are connecting here and talking about like keeping in touch with one another after the class. Just a reminder, throughout the class, if you have a question that you want to see answered in the question and answer section, I would love for you to go down to the little chat box, and right next to the write your message here, you can click on that little chat bubble, and you'll notice that you can ask a question and answer. That will come into my screen as read, and so I'll know to click into it. I'd love for you to ask questions now, ask questions throughout, just so that when that starts, we can start rolling on the questions. There'll be no lag for us. So we're getting into the next part of the class. It's on storytelling. So let's dig in. I'm going to share the screen. Writing. We'll come back to it in some capacity during the online branding part. Again, I love to reiterate discipline, discipline, discipline. But this specifically is about storytelling and the importance when you're writing fiction or nonfiction or whatever it is, writing a book, the bones of storytelling. So number 9 here, and I did make a mistake because I had 10 over here, and now we've gone back to 9, so just ignore that. Number 9 is called identify your inner motor. So I got this from a TED Talk. It's a TED Talk by the guy that created the movie WALL-E. And he said that within creating his characters, he needed to get to the point where that he could identify his character's inner motors. So the inner motor is basically the thing that is driving you forward, is propelling you forward. It's the thing that is going to guarantee that you are a different person from point A to point B. So what are the things driving you? What are the things that are driving your characters that you're creating? People will identify with those inner motors. And so when we see a character that wants to win, that wants something different in their life, then we start to identify with them and we want to see them win. You can look at any classic character in any movie, in any book, in any novel. You can look at some of your favorite bloggers, and you can probably very easily identify what their inner motor is. It is the thing that is driving them. It is the thing they are pushing towards. You can see it on Instagram, food bloggers, because I love those, and the fitness, weight loss accounts. You can always figure out, like, what is the thing driving somebody? We as humans are inspired by that. So the best advice that I can give you when it comes to developing good characters is making sure that each character has a really sound inner motor, a thing that they are driving towards, a thing that is going to help a person cheer them on. It's kind of crazy, but it's like when you watch TV shows or you read books and you realize that you have a bad character, but at the same time, you start to cheer for that bad character and you start to want to see them win. And that's because their inner motor is so sound and so developed that you can't help but want to see them get from point A to point B. Number 10, find those tentpole moments. So my friend Preston Yancey, he helped me outline my first book, and he told me you need to be able to find your tentpole moments. Your tentpole moments are the different parts in your story or in the story of a character that prove that something has shifted, something has changed, something has become evidently different. So if you were to take a piece of paper and write a long line outside of that paper. I'll do an example of it after I'm done with the screen share. You'll be able to mark out all the different points in a specific journey that changed you, that made you a different person, that ensured that the person that started this journey was different than the person that ended this journey. So what are those tentpole moments? What are those pivotal things that have happened to you or happened to your characters that you need to make sure that the reader sees and the reader identifies with? This is so huge when you're like thinking about writing a book or something long form, like a short story. I encourage you to do the outlining beforehand in some cases. I am a big advocate for just sitting down, writing, and seeing what comes out of you. But if you want to have a very cohesive story at the beginning or maybe halfway through, start to outline those tentpole moments. What are the points in which I'm going to prove to the reader something's changed, something's developed, something has become evidently different? Okay, right here, what I'm showing you right now is the hero's journey, stages of the hero's journey. And so this is a diagram. Like I said earlier, you guys will get the PDF of this presentation so that you can reference it at any point. But the hero's journey, if you Google it, is probably the best way that you can set up a sound story and a solid story. The hero's journey has been used for years and years and years, and it's basically the way that you tell a cohesive story with all the things that are the making of a great story. I'm promising you that you are going to look at stories differently, whether they are books, whether they're books or whether they are TV shows. You're going to start to see the hero's journey in absolutely everything. So if we start on the diagram, the first point, number 1, is ordinary world. And so ordinary world is basically the start to any story. Things are calm, things are pretty normal, things are kind of always as they have been. And we go down the hero's journey to number 2, which is the call to adventure. So that's the point in which something changes. Something sparks us to attention. Something is calling us into living a different kind of life. Number 3, refusal of the call. So that's basically like you get the call to action and then you stop yourself, because most of us stop ourselves because the lies become too loud or there's something in the way that's keeping us from moving forward into that adventure. You're going to start to see this in so many of the stories that you pay attention to. So number 4, we are at the I'm really bad at math. So the 3 o'clock point on the journey, where you are meeting the mentor. So somebody comes along with you on that journey that pushes you forward, that makes you believe that you're capable, that basically says, hey, this can become a reality. Like, I'm going to come alongside you. So we've got the ordinary world, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, the meeting of the mentor, leading to number 5, crossing the threshold, where it's basically like you're making the point to become a different person. You are pushing forward into the threshold. That's when things are going to get rocky. That's when things might get a little bit weird. That's where the tension is going to start to build. That leads into number 6, tests, allies, and enemies. I always think, like, if I look at this hero's journey, I think about the Wizard of Oz. I think number 1, ordinary world. We've got Dorothy sitting in Kansas, and she's just kind of whining about how she wants to be somewhere over the rainbow. There's the call to adventure. She basically gets stuck in a tornado, and then her house gets plopped into Munchkinville. And if you notice, very quickly, number 3 happens, refusal of the call. Dorothy says, I don't want to do this. I just want to go home. And the Munchkins are like, too late. You kind of got to go on the journey now. The meeting of the mentor is Glinda. Glinda is basically saying, hey, you can do this. Follow the yellow brick road. And that leads into her crossing the threshold. Her realizing, okay, I'm going to have to take a journey in order to get back to the place that I want to get to. Then she meets tests, allies, and enemies. She meets the Wicked Witch. She goes into the dark forest, the lions, the tigers, and bears. That's completely number 6, tests, allies, enemies. Number 7, we're at the 6 o'clock in the journey. We're kind of halfway through the journey. That's the approach. I think that for the Wizard of Oz, probably the approach would be at that point where they're getting out of the poppy field and like all that music is playing about, you're out of the woods, you're out of the dark. Da, da, da. I'm not a good singer at all, so I apologize. And that leads into the central ordeal. And the central ordeal is like, wait, this person that we've been journeying to meet, which is Oz, like, isn't actually who he says he is, and you're going to have to go fight the Wicked Witch and basically bring back the broom if you want to get anywhere in this journey. That leads us into number 9, the reward. And so the reward is basically they kill the Wicked Witch and they realize like the power has always been in Dorothy's shoes. The reward comes full circle. The road back, I always kind of bunch these, the road back, the resurrection, the return with the elixir. This is basically like the point in which you are being birthed into that new character. You are evidently different. That is your road back. If you notice in any good story, like it always seems like you always come back to the place in which you first started. There's always that road back that leads to that resurrection, that leads to that return with the elixir, which is that final closing point when the story is finished and it closes out and things resolve. Now, not every book that you read is going to have the hero's journey to it. Some are going to have elements of it that others don't have. But on the next part of this diagram, you will see the hero's journey happening with the story of Cinderella. So you see Cinderella's family dynamic in her ordinary world. She's got her stepsister. She's got her stepmom. She's not living a very happy life. The call to adventure is the ball at the palace. She wants to go to the ball, but she realizes quickly after a refusal of the call is that Cinderella cannot go to the ball. So the meeting of the mentor is when the fairy godmother shows up. Then Cinderella actually decides she's going to go to the ball. That's the crossing of the threshold. She's starting to get a taste of the character that she could become. That leads into the tests, the allies, and the enemies, which is the pumpkin, the carriage, the dress, the glass slippers. I don't really understand this except for the fact that like they had to make it a good story. But like if I'm a fairy godmother, why the heck would I ever make somebody like go to a ball with glass slippers and like have a pumpkin carriage and come home by midnight. Like, let Cinderella live her life is what I say. But the approach is Cinderella dancing with the prince. That's like the pivotal moment of the story. The central ordeal is that she falls in love with the prince. And that's kind of an ordeal because he's pretty rich and she is a servant. So the reward is that the prince falls in love with her. The road back home is when midnight strikes and Cinderella goes back to her old life. And the resurrection is the glass shoe fitting on Cinderella's feet. It's kind of like the, oh no, we thought that this story was going south and it's actually going to be a happy ending. So the return with the elixir is the prince marrying the princess and them living happily ever after. So I did not create this diagram. I can send you guys the link to the diagram itself. It actually does a pretty cool approach to the movie Fight Club as well. It kind of funnels that into the hero's journey. So I'll send that over to you, but these are by far the best stages of the hero's journey that I've been able to see. So number 11, be your own brave. I think this is really important in storytelling because when we tell a story, we want to lead our readers on a journey. We want them to see our ups. We want them to see our downs. We want them to see the good moments, the bad moments. We kind of want to be hanging them in a little bit of suspension so that they don't know what's going to be happening. They don't know what's going to come next. With my own book writing journey, I realized that if I actually mapped out my story, it would be like when I dealt with depression, like rock bottom depression, come back up for light, down to a rock bottom depression, write some love letters, down to a rock bottom depression. It was kind of a really rocky journey. And I was really hesitant to write out that journey because I didn't want to keep giving my readers hope and then pulling that hope away from them. In this whole process, I really struggled to write my story out because I didn't really feel like a noble character. I didn't know that I was a brave character. That's why I always say be your own brave, meaning when you write out your tentpole moments and you look at the different parts of your story that have changed you or have changed your character, there is going to be this tendency or this temptation to want to say, well, that was a moment in which I wasn't brave, or that's a moment where I could have absolutely done better. And while I think that like life lessons are important and it's always good to see the places where we can improve, I think it's also really important that we redefine some of the things that have happened in our past. And we realize that at the moments where we thought we weren't brave, maybe we were braver than we ever imagined. And so I want you to look at your tentpole moments and I want you to look at them very seriously to say like, what is something that I actually learned from this that was actually brave or actually made me a better person? We look at our valleys and our lows and we always think like, I want to hide that from the world. I don't want people to know about that. But if you dig deeper, you often realize like you've learned something and it's turned you into somebody different. And why not embrace those things and put those things out there? Number 12, the story of a gray shirt, the Me Too moments. I'm a big advocate for Me Too moments. And so basically the story of a gray shirt, this story happened several years ago. I had just moved to Atlanta and there was a girl, Jenna, who showed up at my desk, I think the second day that I was in my new office space. And she basically said, hey, I want to be involved. I want to help you with whatever I can help you with. Like, I just want to come and hang out with you. I want to do whatever you need me to do. So I took her up on this offer and I said, hey, I've been writing a book for several months now. I've not really gotten the chance to respond to all the emails that I want to respond to. So if you want to help me come in and like basically read some of these emails, I would be eternally grateful. Now, when I meant emails, I didn't mean like requests for appointments or different interviews or like emails with my friends. I meant like there was a stack of emails, 400 emails from my readers sharing thoughts, stories about their lives, coming to my inbox when they were having a breakup or when they met the person they wanted to marry or when they went on a great Tinder date, all sitting in my inbox. And I hadn't gotten a chance to actually read those stories and absorb those stories. And anybody that knows me knows that I like to read as many of those stories as I possibly can because I always want to know what you're going through. I always want to know my audience and be very good with handling the gentle and fragile details of your stories. And so Jenna comes in, we start sitting side by side and we just start reading the emails and we are just like we were entranced by some of these stories. We were taking stories and we were writing them down on scraps of paper and we were hanging them up on the wall. I was taking stories, I was copying and pasting them into design files. I was printing them out and putting them all over the walls because I realized, like, wow, my people have so many empowering, amazing stories to tell. And there was this one specific story that we read together, and like we needed like a box of tissues for it, about a girl who had been with a guy for about 2 years, and they had been together, and they reached the point that I think a lot of us reach in relationships where we realize this isn't working anymore, and I don't know if this is going to move forward, and I don't know if we're the best for each other. And so they made the decision to break it off and to go their separate ways. And the girl came back to the guy and she asked him, like, is there any possible way that we could have one more day together? One more day where we act like nothing's wrong, where we act like everything is okay, just like to have some good memories to leave with. And the guy agreed to it, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But they went on this one perfect day and they went to the park and they had a picnic in the park, and the girl's writing all of this in an email to us. And she said that there was one point in the middle of the picnic where she just couldn't hold it together anymore. She lost it and she just started crying into his lap. And I think that she was grieving like the fact that this was over and that it was really going to end after this. And the boy was wearing a gray shirt and she cried into his gray shirt. Well, she said the next day she went to church and she saw the boy standing across the church from her. And they were sitting in the middle of the service, and she realized he was wearing the same gray shirt that he had been wearing the day before. And she realized that he actually had her tear stains in his shirt. And she wanted to stand up at that moment and be like, do you see that person over there? Do you see him? Those tears are mine. That person is mine. And at that moment, she realized people are not things. We don't get to keep them. And she wrote this into the email, and literally me and Jenna are like, this girl has dropped some major fire on us, because how many of us have felt this in our lifetimes where we want to keep everything together and we want everything to be perfect. And then we realize, like, we don't get to control as much as we thought we could control. And we certainly don't get to control people. People are not things. We cannot keep them. And I think right there in that moment, in that little office space in 2014, our version of the Me Too moment was born. We realized that in all the different stories that we are telling, while they might be different, while they might carry on in different places, while there might be different dialogue, there are underlying things that make every story the same or make stories relatable. Those are the Me Too moments. I think it is the biggest thing that you can master, and the most important thing you can master in storytelling is the moment that you bring us into the story and we get to nod our heads and say, me too. I've been there before. I've felt that before. I've gone through that before. And so something that I've struggled with as a writer before is that I struggle with giving people too many details, in the sense that I used to not want to give people details at all. I wanted everything to be vague and everything to be kind of hypothetical so that everybody could relate to the story. And then I started to realize with my first editor that it might actually be the opposite. Instead of me sharing less details, by sharing more details, I could actually pull somebody into a story. If I told them about the yellow sweater, or I told them about the alleyway with the yellow bench, or if I told them about the phone conversation or the lottery tickets, all of these things are actually pivotal moments in some of my stories and tentpole moments. And some of you are thinking, like, what about the lottery tickets? And so maybe, you know what, whatever. I'll just share the story so we can all have a Me Too moment together. But the lottery ticket story came from the first relationship that I had been in. That was kind of like my first really like long relationship. It was like a 3-year relationship, and I really liked the guy. I'd fallen in love with him. He was the first person I ever said, I love you to. But we realized pretty early on, like, or maybe like a year into the relationship, maybe we weren't the healthiest for one another. We were young. We kind of thought, like, at that point, like, nothing will ever change. We'll always be in this spot. And everything will always be okay. And that's just not usually what happens with the first person that you fall in love with. And I just remember he had a bit of a drug problem, and a lot of people in my hometown had a bit of a drug problem. And he basically, at one point, we were 3 years into dating. We were at the point where we basically were holding it together just to prove that we could. And he gave me a birthday gift. And when I opened up the card, there were lottery tickets. And then when I unwrapped the gift, there were more lottery tickets. And at this point, I'm pretty pissed because I'm like, did you just give me lottery tickets for my birthday? Like, what is this? Like, I was just sad because in that moment, I thought, you don't even know me at all. Like, you didn't even think to get me a thoughtful gift. You got me lottery tickets. Like, what is this? And he told me in that moment, you know, like one time we got a scratch off ticket and he said he loved seeing my face light up when I was scratching off that ticket. And I was always freaking out about student loans and how I wasn't going to be able to pay off my student loans. And I always felt insecure about that because he had more money than I did. And I always felt inadequate. And he said, I thought that if I got you a bunch of lottery tickets, maybe one of them would be a winning ticket and you could pay off your student loans and you could finally like let that go and like you could be happy. And y'all, it was like this dramatic like Grey's Anatomy moment where we just like both were crying on the couch with these scratch off tickets. I scratched them all off and I only won $10, but that's a side note. And I think it was a moment for both of us in that relationship where we realized this is over. This is done. We aren't going to know each other for the rest of our lives. This isn't meant to happen forever. And it was the moment that we were both meant to let go of. Now, there are a lot of different moments within that story that make that story completely mine. And I can feel it and I can still relive it in some ways. But there are a lot of things within that story that make it completely relatable, that make people in the studio audience say, preach, that make people realize like, wow, that's my story too. And so don't be afraid of the little details in your story that make that story completely yours. Invite people into that. That might be the most powerful thing that you can do because the underlying Me Too moment is going to happen. Whether you write about it or you don't write about it, the Me Too moments are going to show up. They're going to take their place. And I promise you, they are going to be loud. Now, number 13. The art to Taylor Swifting. This is everybody's favorite point that I ever make in a writing intensive class. And because somebody will write about it in the comment box, yes, 13, Taylor Swift. I definitely did that on purpose. I love Taylor Swift, though. I can't say I don't love her because I do. So the art to Taylor Swifting, I kind of came up with this art form because I realized like Taylor Swift became pretty famous off of stories about other people. If you never noticed that her songs are really about all these other people that she's fallen in love with. Hashtag Drew, hashtag don't Google him because it will make you really sad to figure out what happened to Drew after all of this. And I know somebody's going to Google it anyway. But so the art of Taylor Swifting is basically the art of writing about other people. And so my little watch just broke. So sorry. I lost my train of thought for a second. So it's writing about other people. Now, I get this a lot in my groups and my writing groups and my writing classes about people that are like, I need to start writing because I totally have this story about somebody else that I need to write. I would caution you and tell you, if you are wanting to start writing because you want to write about other people, it might not be the purest motive to sit down and start writing. I've seen this done really well, and I've seen it actually done really badly. That I've seen people that literally have built a brand off of like, I'm going to just write about other people. I'm going to take all of my ghosts and I am going to just write about them endlessly. And the moment we create a ghost, it is hard to get rid of that ghost. And so the art to Taylor Swifting is like, how are we going to write about the things that have happened in our stories that involve other people without necessarily putting those people on the chopping block and making it so that they can't walk out in public. So I always share this story about how the first time that I ever wrote about my faith on the internet, because I have a very different coming to faith story than a lot of other people. It is a blog post called Salvation is Not a Human Thing. If you want to look it up, if you want to read it, because I'm not going to get into the whole background of my faith. But I wrote about this one specific part where I always noticed growing up that my mom would get up every morning, she would make coffee, she would grab her Bible, she would go and she would sit and she would just sit there for an hour to 2 hours every single morning without fail. And as somebody who didn't know if I fully believed in God, I didn't understand why she did this because I knew what our family was like. Specifically, I knew what my brother was like. My brother had brought us all through the ringer with drug addiction. It has been going on for the last 16 years of my life. And so I didn't understand how my mother was so faithful to this relationship with God when I would have argued that maybe God wasn't being the best to her. He certainly wasn't. It didn't seem like he was there in the story of my brother. And so I wrote this into a blog post about my mom and about my brother. And I remember writing this really kind of cutting sentence about my brother. And I'm trying to remember the exact words of it, but it said something along the way, like lines of even like I'm the writer of the family and even I don't have any pretty words to say about my brother. Like it was something that was like really hurtful. And I remember publishing the post and I remember my mom coming into the room where I was writing and she just stood against the door frame. I'll always remember her standing there. And all she said to me was, "That hurt." And I said, "I know, but it's true." And she said, "I know. And that's probably why it hurts so much." We had this kind of exchange with one another. And an hour later, I was contacted by the Huffington Post. And the Huffington Post wanted to take the article on faith and put it up onto their faith vertical. And I said, yes, you can republish the article. But I made a moment in that decision to go back to the blog post and to change that one line about my brother after that interaction with my mom. And so I went in there and I changed the line and I wrote something that maybe felt a little bit fluffier than what I would have normally wrote, or maybe wasn't really sharing my true feelings about the bitterness or the anger that I was feeling towards my brother. But I changed it in the hope that I wouldn't be slashing my brother all over the internet. Now, some writers would have never changed that line. Some people would have said, well, it was true, so I left it at being true. I saw that engagement with my mother, and I realized, wait a minute, even if I'm mad at my brother, even if I'm bitter towards my brother, I want my brother to have a redemption story just as anybody else deserves a redemption story. And if I'm the first person cutting him off at the ankles and making that impossible, then what am I to say that I'm even cheering for him? And I realized in my own writing and in your writing and all of us as writers, we carry a big weight and responsibility when we write about other people. Because when you write something down on a page, you eternalize a person. You basically write out who they are and you give them the opportunity to either change or to never change. Like, I think that when we sit to write things down, we have to remember that every single person deserves redemption. They deserve to be able to change their story just in the way that you wanted to change your story at one point or another. And so my editor, she pushed me to write about my brother in my first book. And I did write about him in bits and pieces. But if you ever go back and you read the points about my brother, you'll notice that every single sentence I wrote about my brother was written in past tense. And I did that on purpose. I did that in the hopes that maybe 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, we're going to be able to look back on this and say, like, remember that? Like, remember how bad that was or how awful that was? But don't you remember when you turned your life around, when you made it good again? I never want to be the one that keeps that from my brother. My brother deserves redemption. It might be your mom that deserves redemption. It might be your boyfriend or somebody that wronged you in some capacity. We need to take this responsibility like very heavily. I think that we have to steward it well when we write about other people. And so I always say, like, don't sit down to write about people if you're angry or if you're bitter or if you're hoping that you can just shove it to them. Like when you're angry and you're mad. And like, this has happened to me before with somebody that I actually knew. There was a miscommunication. They felt like the situation was very different than what the situation was. She got online and she started blogging about me. And she ended up saying something along the lines of like, today I got the chance to take the proverbial knife and shove it into somebody that I know and twist it. Like, she was writing about this real time. I'm not kidding you. And she kept going back to the blog post and editing it and re-editing it and adding details in. And I was watching this happen. And it was painful for me to watch this because I knew she was writing about me. And just so that you know, the story resolved is that she ended up coming to me and she ended up asking forgiveness some point down the line. She realized that she was wrong. And I told her, like, I forgive you, but I don't know that you and I can be in each other's lives anymore because of what you did. And I hope that you learn the lesson that you never, ever do that to somebody else again, that you should never put somebody out there on the internet and just take them to the chopping block, because you can't take those words back, guys. Like, you just can't. Like, we think that we put something on the internet and then we delete it and it goes away for good, and it never goes away. You can find it all. Screenshot. Like, I'm catfish maestro. I find catfishes like it's my job. Things that you think are gone from the internet, I'll find them. I'll show them to you. I did it the other day with this podcast, Up and Vanish. We can talk about it later. You can ask me a question about it. But I found some things on the internet that are creepy. And it's just because you got to be willing to Google and dig. But it's all out there. And all that to say that as a writer, I believe that the number one thing that we need to be willing to do is we need to be willing to put ourselves on the chopping block before anybody else. You can write about other people. You can put them into your stories. But I would be careful to never put into that writing that you can ever claim that you know how the person felt, that you could ever claim that you know exactly what the person's motives were. You don't own that stuff. You only own what happened to you and how it made you feel. Taylor Swifting, over and out. Let me take a sip of water. Hold on one second. Number 14, nursing a vulnerability hangover. I always have number 14 follow number 13 because I find out that when we write about somebody on the internet or we write about something that's really hurt us, what happens promptly after is a vulnerability hangover. It's like, I wrote this thing, I put it out there, and then all of a sudden I feel like I'm going to vomit, or I feel like I probably need to delete that thing, or that was probably a mistake. You probably experienced it in maybe writing or in a blog post or in an Instagram caption. Sometimes we put out our whole vulnerable self and then we deal with this massive hangover afterwards. I often feel vulnerability hangovers after I do a speaking engagement, sometimes after I do writing intensives, where I just kind of feel like maybe I drank myself under a table, but I didn't actually. And so the best way to avoid or nurse a vulnerability hangover is to be careful with the amount of vulnerability that you put out there in the world. And so I get these people that like want to start a blog because they have a story they want to tell, and they create a blog and then they write the story in the first post and they publish it out there, and then they come back to me and they say, okay, well, I wrote everything, so I don't know what to write about anymore because I created the blog, I put the story out there. And there's two things. One, I don't necessarily know that we need to put our biggest, hardest story out there first, especially if we've never had practice putting our words out there and receiving feedback, criticism from other people. Number two, I think that especially if you're writing on the internet for an audience, there is a very tender relationship that needs to be cultivated. That if you gain an audience, that means you are responsible for that audience. That means that you need to learn that audience, gain that audience's trust, and then lead them on a specific journey. Like, I think that my readers would be freaked out if I came out right out the gate and was like, here's the craziest, biggest story that ever happened to me. Deal with it and let's be best friends. Like, I think all of us probably know that person that like you're sitting at a table at dinner and then that person shares that really big, heavy story and like no one at the table was ready for that story. And you're like, oh, wait, like, and it doesn't mean don't share vulnerable stories, but build up to that point. Get to know one another a little bit better, or you're likely going to have that vulnerability hangover, or maybe you won't and you'll never feel anything and you'll just continue to go from table to table, dropping bombs all over the table. All that to say, go ankle deep, go calf deep, go knee deep. Share something that might be a little bit vulnerable for you, and then share something that's a little more vulnerable for you, and then share something that is like maybe really vulnerable for you. And I would say if you're feeling like you're teetering the lines of, should I write about this? Should I put this out there? Is this okay that I'm writing about this? Find that friend, that accountability partner, somebody who knows you really well. Send over the draft before you do anything with it and just ask for their honest feedback. Am I saying too much? Am I not saying enough at all? Just want to be really careful about those things. I had an experience with a reader about 9 or 10 months ago, she'd been dating a guy and then they broke up, and he kind of really like ghosted her and didn't really tell her fully like what was going on. Like there wasn't much explanation as to why they broke up. And she wrote this long blog post about him. It was directly about him and about how he should have done it differently. And about, she basically put words in his mouth to say, this is why you did it. And this is why I'm hurt. And this is why you should never do it again. And it was raw. Like that guy definitely knew that he was being Taylor Swifted at that point. And she came to me and she texted me and she said, I made a mistake. I don't know what to do. Like I just blogged about somebody and it's evident and I'm dealing with all the backlash of it. Because sometimes when you put things out there on the internet, backlash is going to come. And what followed from that, from her choosing to be honest and for her choosing to really nurse that vulnerability hangover, was a blog post that I would argue was 1,000,000 times more powerful, 1,000,000 times more beautiful about why it wasn't necessary for her to Taylor Swift somebody on the internet. During the break, I'm going to look for that blog post, post it into the comment section for you guys. She knows that I share this story. And it just was a really beautiful story, but I'm telling you, it was like 1,000,000 times more powerful than the time when she was really trying to like make somebody else see those words and make somebody else hurt. So number 15, thank your limp. So in your own storytelling process, whether you are developing characters or you are writing your own story out, we have the capacity to feel really insecure about the things that have happened to us that are big or might seem broken or seem scary, or they seem like no one is ever going to understand those things. And I always bring number 15 into this writing class because it's one of my favorite stories. It's the story of Jacob in the Bible. Jacob is my favorite person in the Bible. He is my spirit animal. And if you read the story of Jacob, Jacob was actually pretty much a turd. He was not a good guy when this whole thing started out. Like he just, I don't use turd that often, but I'll use it for Jacob because like, he just did some really shady things. And to that I say, like, his mom was pretty shady too, and they were shady together. But so Jacob kind of like, he learns from like his times in which he's like not that good of a person, and he's really trying to reconcile some things. And he ends up having a family, and he ends up like basically coming face to face with his brother and dealing with some of the awful things that he had done. But right before that story happens, Jacob has this random story in the Bible where he sends his whole family over a river and he stays back to like, quote unquote, deal with some stuff. And this guy shows up, like random man shows up that's supposed to be a symbol of God and just starts wrestling Jacob. And like, can you imagine what it was like in that moment? Like some random dude shows up and is like, let's wrestle, dude. And they apparently wrestle throughout the whole entire night. And at daybreak, it looks like Jacob is about to win. Like he's starting to get really confident, really cocky about himself. Like, I've got this. And the guy simply touches Jacob's hip and his hip is dislocated out of his socket. And he just like loses that fight. And you wonder like, why did this story happen? And then Jacob gets a new name. And it's just this random story in the Bible. And what I realized that is the coolest thing about this story is that this man that was a symbol of God touched Jacob's hip, and his hip is dislocated out of his socket for the rest of his life. In the sense, he walks with a limp because of this. And so it says it right there that he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And yet, never again in the rest of Jacob's story do you ever see Jacob walking with a limp or complaining about his limp or talking about his limp in the sense of like, I'm so ungrateful for this one time that I wrestled this God man. And like, you just don't see him complaining about the limp. And what's even crazier is somebody pointed this out to me recently. If you go into Hebrews and like there's this point about Jacob, and there's actually this point in the scripture where Jacob is said that he's standing there and he's standing with a cane as to identify that he still has his limp. It's still there. And all that to say that sometimes in life, we are going to have those limps. We are going to have those things that dislocate our hip out of our sockets. We are going to have the things that bring us to our knees, that make us feel like we can't fight forward. And they're going to be the things that also give us second chances. And so instead of complaining about those things, what if we learn to be thankful for those things? What if we learned to be thankful for the things that we feel like wounded us, but then opened up the door for us to have more real and honest stories with other people? I look at my own life. I think like I struggled with depression once in 2010. And then in 2014, I struggled with a depression that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. If I thought the first time I struggled with depression was real, this was like the realest thing that I have ever experienced. And what's crazy is that like that second time of struggling with that rock bottom depression has opened me up to have so many more honest stories with people, to have so many relational points with people, that if I didn't go through that point that I consider to be my limp, that I consider that depression might be my limp for the rest of my life, I cannot imagine having the stories and the breakthrough that I have been able to experience. And if I didn't have that limp. And so your limp doesn't make you weak. It makes you relatable. It makes other people look at you and think like you're human too. My mom always says like, hallelujah, when something comes along and breaks your heart, because it finally levels you. It takes the pride out of your lungs. It makes you see people eye to eye. And your stories can have that. Your lives can have that. Your characters can have that. It's the point where we all become relatable. It's the point where we realize like, that person is not up on a pedestal. You know, it's my editor that tells me all the time that you can preach so much better from the mud pit than you can from the podium. You can write so much better in the mud pit than on the platform. And so embrace that limp and thank that limp. Thank that ugly thing in your life that might feel unresolved right now or might be resolved 5 years in the future, because that might be the very part of your story that makes you relatable. I don't know why we ever started thinking that we were all having these bright, shiny stories where nothing bad ever happened to one another. Because if you've ever related deeply with a person and felt deeply, it's usually because there's been some sort of pain in their stories. We relate to one another's pain. None of us are going to escape this lifetime without pain. And so we should start thanking that pain for bringing us closer to one another. Number 16, honesty hour. I love honesty hour. It's my favorite thing. It's a term that I came up with several years ago when I went on my first date with a guy named Lane Sheets, who I ended up marrying, and he is over there sitting in the corner. But on the first date with Lane, I basically decided, you know what, screw whatever rules people ever told me about first dates. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to roll out. I don't got time for no chumps. I don't want no scrubs. So I'm just going to lay it all out on the table. And like maybe like 15 minutes into our date, I don't know, babe, was it like 15 minutes? Like I was just like, well, since this is honesty hour, I'm going to tell you about this. And I told him about past breakups and past relationships. And he told me about past ex-girlfriends and things that we had messed up at. And maybe I told him about the time that I got arrested when I was 19 years old. I can tell you that story later if you want to know about it, but I learned a lot from it. And we just said everything that probably shouldn't have been said on a first date. And we paraphrased everything with honesty hour. Well, because it's honesty hour, I can say this. And I'm telling you, it led to the most honest exchange with one another, just this chance to be honest with one another. And so I ended up writing this Monday morning email about honesty hour and how refreshing honesty hour had been to me. And I asked my readers to have an honesty hour with me. And what came back were some of the coolest, most amazing stories that I have ever seen. They weren't polished stories. They weren't perfect stories, but they were honest and they were brutal and they were beautiful. And I think that we as writers, we have the capacity and the ability to host honesty hours on the regular. We're living in a world where a lot of things are fake, where you go into Instagram and you can just see perfect image, perfect image, perfect image. And I think that a lot of us are tired of it. At the same time, we don't want to be that person that like puts all of your dirty laundry on the internet, because that's a little bit scary too. And you have those people on Facebook that you're like, oh my gosh, I wish that they would stop sharing about that thing. I think everybody knows that person. And if we don't know that person, then maybe we are that person. But all that to say is that there is this fine line between sharing too much and then sharing enough that makes a person feel like they can trust you, that they can relate to you, that they can be real with you. I remember getting my first draft back of my book, and I remember my editor writing a letter to me, and she said in that first draft, she said, I could be completely off on this, but I think that you're hiding behind some really pretty language when you could just come out and tell me how you really feel. And it hit me hard because I realized she sees me. I am hiding behind language. I am trying to make this prettier than it really is. Sometimes there is a time to say the leaves danced and autumn came like rain and all of this poetic stuff. And you guys probably know, you've probably written really poetic stuff and you read that back and you think, what does that even mean? I don't even know what I meant by that. Just look at any of my first blog posts. And then there's a time to say it sucked and it hurt. And I still don't have the words for it. And it still hurts. And people would get that. And people will understand that. And they might understand that more than on the day that you said that the autumn ground kissed the sun on the pavement, whatever that means. So yes to imagery. Yes to language. Yes to shirts that smell like Abercrombie and Fitch or something. Actually, that's like Teenage Love Story. I'm sorry. Yes to rustic Ralph Lauren cologne or something. But like, also, yes to the time where you're just honest to say, it hurts. I'm not over it. I don't know why I said Abercrombie and Fitch cologne. Like, am I in love with 13-year-olds? I'm not. Like, no, guys. Okay. Sorry. I always find one point in my writing intensive that I say something really inappropriate. And so, no, I don't love 13-year-olds. I was just reminiscing on you guys know what I mean. The days in 8th grade where Andrew wore Abercrombie and Fitch cologne and you got to borrow his sweatshirt. Okay. I'm with a powwow of girls. And so I think somebody understands me. Please make me feel less awful about this moment. Okay. Number 17. Kill your darlings. I do not love 13-year-olds. Stephen King says, kill your darlings. Here's the quote right here. Kill your darlings, even when it breaks your egocentric little scribbler's heart, kill your darlings. Meaning, the words that you are most in love with might not actually serve a purpose. Sometimes you need to cut those words out of the story to draw your reader to the point in which they need to arrive to. Sometimes we get so stuck in our own language and our own stories and in that perfect little sentence that we feel like it's like personally like an agenda against us if somebody tells us to cut it out and to not write that thing. But you have to remember there is a purpose rooted in every story that you write. And if anything gets in the way of that story, sabotage it, get rid of it, change it. Kill your darlings, even when it breaks your egocentric little scribbler's heart, kill your darlings. If you've never read the memoir by Stephen King called On Writing, I recommend grabbing it because it's fantastic and the guy schools everything. He's just fantastic when it comes to the process of writing. But all that to say that like we have to be willing to say like, hey, that line is not serving a purpose. And so I'm okay if I have to get rid of that line. And the one thing that I say is I used to delete those lines and then get rid of them. Now what I actually do is I created this Word document that I keep on my computer. And it's basically like the garbage dump of all of my words. And so anytime that I cut something out, I take it and I put it into the Word document so that if I need to find it later or if it comes back around, I've got it. I don't delete it. It's not gone for good, but it stays in this little landfill where if I need to access it later, it's there. And so the words that you're killing, they might not have a purpose right now, but they may have a purpose in the next project you're working on or the next story that you're telling. So you can keep those precious sentences that you love, that you want to keep around. You don't have to get rid of them for good. You can put them into a Word document and save them for later. But all that to say, the final point in the storytelling process is being willing to kill the sentences that don't serve the point, that don't bring your reader closer to the final point. Okay, so we're going to be taking about an 8-minute break, and then we're going right into the brand and into the question and answer section. So if you guys have had any questions from the process of writing and the storytelling part of writing, please put those stories into the question box so that we can flow right from the brand into the question and answer section. This would be the time to grab food if you need food, grab coffee, go fluff your hair, whatever you need to do. It's a little bit of a longer break. I need to give my voice a rest for a second. But let me know how you're enjoying the class and how everything is going for you, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Don't be alarmed if the video comes off and the sound comes off. That's just us taking a break. I didn't go anywhere, and I will be back. Okay, we're coming back. Woo-woo! How are you guys? Are you ready? Are you excited? Are you limber? Awesome. I'm excited. This is like, I think I've talked less this time than in my past intensives, which is crazy because I feel like I've talked a ton. But hey, I'm excited. This might be the first intensive that actually ends on time, which is awesome because then you guys can go out to the pool or write some words or write a book or do whatever your heart desires. Okay, so we're going to get into the final section called the brand section. And so this is specifically for kind of online branding, online platform building. So I added this into the class like as a half-hour segment specifically because whether you're writing fiction, you're writing nonfiction, you want to write books, or you want to write blogs, platform building is pretty essential. And I hate that word platform sometimes because it makes me feel a little bit icky, but I've learned to get over it for the simple fact that I've worked with authors that have had no platform and have had to build a platform in order to sell their books. And so as somebody who has gone the traditional route of publishing, I will tell you that publishers want to see platforms. That doesn't mean they need to see millions of followers. It doesn't mean that you need to have the most strategic online social media plan. It means that you have to be willing to put your books out there and put your work out there so that they know that you're going to work just as hard as their marketing team is going to work, which is why I like to talk brand and I like to talk platform, especially because we live in a world where people would much rather build their platform than their foundation. And I think that's a little bit messed up. I'm getting a little bit spicy, but live your good life and then like also build a platform that is going to make people feel like they're being welcomed into something that's going to make their life better. I don't know. I'm getting a little saucy, but I just think that everything that we put online can either give people life or take life away from people. And so I would just be mindful of the things that are being put online and being mindful of the brand that you want to create for yourself. When I talk about platform building, I kind of talk about building a house because to me, building a platform is kind of like building a home. I think about your blog on the internet and I think that that is like inviting somebody into your home. So my blog is like my home. And what do I want my home to be like? Do I want it to be inviting? Do I want people to stick around for a while? Do I want them to feel comfortable? And so instead of always being like, well, how can I best build my platform? I think like, how can I best build my home? Like, what do I want people to find when they Google me on the internet? What kind of conversations do I want to be having? What kind of relationship do I want to have with my readers? And so when I build my own platform specifically, I like to believe that I build with individuals in mind, that I should never want to have 8,000 followers or 80,000 followers if I don't know how to take care of one follower, if I don't know how to steward that relationship well. And so that is the mindset that I come at from platform and brand building. And the reason that I touch on it is just because it is vital and it is important. And for people that have thought like, well, I want to write books, so I shouldn't waste my time on a blog, I think yes and no. If you know you want to write books and you can dive right into that and start doing it, then I say go and go at it with your whole heart. But if you're trying to figure out what your story is and you have a strong aversion to getting feedback from people, I think a blog is a really great first step. It will teach you discipline. It will teach you how to cultivate an environment. It will teach you how to write consistently. And that's the biggest thing that I've ever learned how to do, is to not just write when I feel inspired, but to write every day and to be pushing out anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 words every single day. And not that that is like throughout the whole span of a day. That stuff usually happens in the first hour of the day. And so we're going to dig into the brand. I do have a part of the presentation that you guys will get. And so I'm going to go back to my screen share, and then we're going to dig into the question and answer section. So be sure to ask your questions and answers, or ask your questions and I will try to give you answers. Awesome. Sorry, I say dumb things all the time. I kind of touched on it a little bit, but the first point is crepe shops. And some of you are thinking, what the heck is a crepe shop? What does that even mean? So I don't know why, but like years ago, I thought that I wanted to own my own crepe shop. I thought that was like my dream to like own a coffee crepe shop, even though I don't know how to make coffee and my husband has to make it for me. And I don't know how to make a crepe, but I do want to take a crepe making class. But all that to say, what I talked about earlier about building your online presence the way that you would build a home is that I realized probably 5 years ago, it was 5 years ago when I went self-employed, that I didn't want my space on the internet to be some stale internet space. I wanted it to function more like a crepe shop in the sense that people could come and they could feel like they could get cozy there, and it would be a place to come in when it feels like the rain isn't going to ever stop. And I wanted the content to spur on conversations and to create deeper bonds and relationships. And so I always kind of from that point forward was like, my little blog is like my little crepe shop on the internet. And like no one ever knew that. And I've yet to even make a crepe. But it was that mindset switch for me of what am I creating and what am I hoping people step into on the internet? Because whatever you put out there on the internet, you are inviting someone into that. And so what do you want that experience to look like? Number 2, blog binges. I say this because we can get into the habit of consuming other people's lives so much that we do not live our own lives. And so you have to get down and real with yourself at some point to ask, do I want to be a spectator in the lives of other people, or do I want to go out and live my own life? Now, this is correlated with blog binges because I think a lot of us have a tendency to either binge on blogs, binge on Instagram profiles, binge on other people's writing journeys, hoping that it's going to light a fire inside of us to start our own. But it will never be as sweet or fulfilling as the day when we just step off of the internet and we start to write for ourselves. So I think it's great to go online and just see what other people write about and to see what content sparks a fire and to see what things you like about a person's brand. But I also think there has to be a point where we stop consuming and we start creating. We stop consuming and we start creating. And I think also we have to be really careful of the emotions that get stirred up inside of us when we follow certain profiles on social media, or we continue to digest certain things that make us feel icky, or they make us feel not that good, or they make us compare a lot. And at that point, I would say, maybe it's time to stop following. Maybe it's time to stop binging. Maybe it's time to take a step away so that your emotions stay healthy, instead of harboring negative emotions, instead of harboring anger or bitterness or all the things that are starting to stir up inside of you. There is an unfollow button for a reason, and I think that you should exercise it and use it wisely if people are keeping you from living your life, being healthy, and treating the people in your life right. That leads into point number 3, commitment. And commitment is so important. And I've talked about it throughout the whole entire class. But I think that like one of the most valuable things that you can do is try to make a commitment and stick with it. And so I know that people are in the chat box and some people are sitting here and listening to the recording. And so what I would love for you to do is think about, like, from all of the material that you have absorbed and gotten from this class, what is one commitment that you want to make and you want to try to honor that? I would love for you to throw it in the chat box. And I'm not saying it has to be a huge commitment. It doesn't have to be a huge commitment. It could be like, I need to research X, or I want to finally grab that URL, or I want to write a blog post because I haven't in 6 months. It could be something bigger, like I want to commit to finishing my novel. Or I want to commit to writing a memoir. But I find that when we set these really massive goals, we sometimes kind of just thwart our own progress. We set goals that we're not able to achieve. And so have that big goal in mind, but break it down into little baby goals and pick one of those. And so I'd love for you guys to share, whether you email us at info@hannahbrencher.com or you throw it in the chat box, what one commitment is that you want to make after this class. Number 4, the elevator. I talk about this because I had a conversation with a guy one day at a networking event, and I have a pretty strong aversion to networking events. I don't do very well in them. I don't really like talking about myself to other people and this and that, so I need to get better at networking events if I have to go to them. But I was talking to this guy, and he had all these questions about followers and building a follower base and all of this stuff. And I'm talking with him, and it's great. And he's saying a lot of stuff about wanting to have a big fan base. And I said to him, like, maybe pretty bluntly, maybe a little bit saucy, whatever, that's just my nature. And I just said, well, do you pay attention to the person in the elevator with you? And he kind of was like taken aback by that, but it was meant to say, like, yeah, we all want to have like these big brands and these big platforms, but like, what good is it if we can't even pay attention to the person that is right next to us? What do we want to do with that big brand? What do we want to do with that platform? Do we want people to just be following us for followers' sake? I mean, I've learned throughout my own life that you can have a lot of followers, but I can guarantee you that those are not going to be the people that are going to show up for you at 2 a.m. when everything is falling apart. Followers want you to a certain point, and when life gets too messy and they don't want to be along for the ride anymore. People actually like the things that we put up on the screen that are filtered or seem perfect because we do sometimes have a strong aversion to the mess. But I think that if we learn to be in relationship with one another, we learn to have a coffee date with somebody across the table that wants to learn to be a better writer, or we learn to have an accountability partner that wants to hold us to a higher standard, we would be much better equipped to handle a platform. It's like I said earlier, building a foundation before a platform. That if we're always just building a platform, we're never going to have a strong foundation. And as somebody who has gone down that road before and has lost herself to the things that she created, I can tell you, building a foundation is the best thing that you're ever going to do. And a foundation is the people that surround you and the people that cheer for you, and who's there when the screen shuts off or the writing stops, and who are the people that are going to love you even if you never create another thing again. Who are those people that you surround yourself with? And I would say the best thing you can do is invest in those people more than you invest in this need or want to have all of these people watching your life. The more people that watch your life, the higher the stakes get, the more your life becomes in a fishbowl, the more that people are waiting to see you fail. I've honestly lived it, and I've lived it on a much smaller scale than some people out there in the world. And so I just keep my head down. I do the work. Whoever emails me, I try to love on them and make their life better. I occasionally make a Tinder match. I know somebody in this class is dating somebody that they met on Tinder, and I was a part of that story. And I'd rather have those little stories than these vague stories where I don't know my readers and I don't know my people. If you don't know your people, how are you supposed to write words that are going to impact them? Screw the rules is the next point. And basically what I mean by that is that like people are going to try to shove a ton of rules at you of how to have a successful platform or how to be a good blogger, or the fact that you have to blog 5 days a week if you ever want to have a readership, or you need to be tweeting 6 times a day. There's all these rules. And I always say, learn the rules and then promptly forget whatever rules you don't need. Because at the end of the day, yeah, you want to build into your platform because you want to be able to share your writing and your words. But you also want to make sure that you have a life. And sometimes the rules of the internet try to steal life from you. I used to go to this one particular conference where there were a lot of people that were blogging, and they all said like the best way to blog was 5 days a week. And I'm telling you, like, these people did not look happy. They did not look fulfilled in their lives. They were like, they weren't present at the conference because they were all worried about the post that had to come tomorrow. And I thought to myself, what kind of life is this if you don't enjoy the thing that you're creating? And so I say know the rules to forget the rules, because if it steals the joy of what you set out to do, then what is the point of that? Like, I think it's good to know strategy. It's good to know, like, hey, don't send an email at 3 a.m. because people probably aren't going to be reading it. But at the same time, like, I think you need to be true to yourself and true to your platform to do the things that work for you. And the same thing with, like, people want the most efficient route to get the most followers and, like, get the most people in their corner. And I sometimes say, like, hey, take on something that's really inefficient and it might be more beneficial to you. Recently, as in yesterday, I have a Monday morning email club, and I decided, like, what's something fun that I want to do to improve this club? When people join onto the club, I want to send them an email. Like, if you joined on a Tuesday, I want to send you an email before Monday hits that welcomes you into the club and asks you, like, please respond to this email. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your life. I just want to know who's reading. And I sent that out yesterday to 94 people that had joined in the last week to this email club. And I got like 6 or 7 responses so far that I've been able to read through. And I'm telling you, like, crazy stories about people that are struggling with depression, people that have gotten out of bad marriages, people that struggle with self-harm. And you might think it's really inefficient to respond to these people or to read these stories, but I think that inefficiency is actually a really good thing because it's allowing me to understand my readers, to know where they're coming from, and to be reminded again and again and again that I am in awe of the shoes that I have never been able to walk in. So the next one is followers, question mark. So we talked about this a little bit, but I don't know. I would say, like, if you want to have followers, ask yourself the question, am I doing something that is follow worthy? What are you doing that's worth following? And if it's nothing, then think a little bit. I don't know. Like, I'm never going to tell anybody that what they're doing is wrong, but I would also, like, it goes back to that question of, like, is what I'm doing giving life, or is it kind of stealing life away? And I talk about this stuff honestly because it's stuff that I've focused on before and stuff that I've wondered, like, when I post something, did I just post that because I'm really insecure and I want people to see me? Or am I posting that because I think that people will actually get something out of it and benefit from it and their lives will be better because of it? So I don't even like the word followers. I like to say that they're people that would be down to get pancakes at 2 a.m. at a sketchy diner if the opportunity presented itself. I like to believe that every person that follows me is that person that would be ready to show up to the diner and get real about life. So less focus on followers and more focus on the content that you're creating and the things that you are producing that become follow worthy. I always hope that I just have, at the end of my life, I want to hope and believe that I have so much content that hasn't even been published, that, like, I know that, like, it would take me years upon years to get rid of all of this content and to put it out there in the world, but that I was so disciplined to create that content that I never had a lack of it. I always had excess of it. So our last 2 points, boundaries and the orphans. We talked about the orphans, so I'm not going to dig much into it more. Basically, that idea of, like, pick a project and follow through with it instead of leaving little orphans on the internet in the forms of blogs and websites and projects that we never finish. Starting is really easy. Finishing is really hard, but it's really sweet to learn the discipline of finishing. Boundaries is really, really important. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have a hard time when it comes to writing, is because we don't have very many boundaries. We let anybody text us at any point, and we jump on our phone when we're not feeling inspired, and we scroll for what ends up being an hour that we're never going to get back of our lives. And so creating decent boundaries, especially if you want to sit down and you want to do the work of it. So I always like to share that, like, you know, it's like true crime. It's like crime scenes. It's not even true crime. It's just crime in general, I guess. I love watching true crime documentaries. Like, anybody that knows me knows, like, I am, like, the biggest armchair detective when it comes to the JonBenet Ramsey case and now the Up and Vanished case. And so the number one thing that I learned from true crime shows, because Elaine and I watch them every single night, basically, is that when a crime occurs, the first thing that happens is the detectives come in and they have to tape off the crime zone. And the reason that they do that is that nobody can come in and start messing with the evidence, getting their fingerprints all over it, making it harder to solve the crime. And yet, when it comes to our own lives, we rarely ever tape off the scene. We sit down, we go to write our stuff, and we've already sat in our bed for the last half hour scrolling through other people's contents, scrolling through their tweets, letting other people press their fingerprints all over our days, that we wonder why we sit down at the desk, we feel really uninspired. It's because we're letting voices in that don't need to be a part of our writing process. The best thing you can ever do is put your phone onto airplane mode, don't touch your phone at all, and sit down and be alone with whatever words are going to come out of you. It's going to feel vulnerable and it's going to feel a little weird, but I promise that if you keep sitting there, the words are going to come and they are going to show up and it is going to be real, but it's always going to be required that you sit down first and you wait on those words and you write a bunch of crappy drafts And then finally gold is going to strike. There have been writing days where I've written thousands upon thousands of words, and the only salvageable amount of words was 28 words, but they were 28 dang good words. And so being willing to sit and set your boundaries so that other people can't come in and influence your craft, so that you're not becoming a slave to your inbox, so that you can keep yourself from writing. We kind of like mask these things as like being really noble. Well, I have to do this and I have to do this. But at some point we have to stop making excuses, and we just need to sit and do the work. If you have a really hard time focusing and you want a really cool app that will help you focus more, there's this app called Forest, and it's fantastic, and it's $2, but it's like worth the investment. It's less than a cup of coffee. And what happens is that like it breaks up your time into like 25-minute pockets. So what you do is you plant a tree and you don't touch your phone for that entire 25 minutes. And if you don't touch your phone for that 25 minutes, a little tree gets planted. And soon enough, you will build a forest. And then they start planting trees in other countries for other people. And it's pretty cool. I'm just saying, I've started a forest this week and I'm having a fantastic time doing so. So if you're looking for a gamified version for not touching your phone, I'm not beyond it. Forest is the app for you. Okay, so 3 final points before we get into the question and answers. So start asking your questions and we are going to roll with it. 3 last words, as I like to call them. The first last word, this is from a blog post that I wrote, and it basically says, any path towards change, a path towards being someone new, will lead you to the camps in your brain where the liars build fires and tell ghost stories at night. I always come back to this point for the simple fact that we cannot talk enough about the liars that are going to try to keep you from reaching your full potential. I promise you, writer's high is going to hit you today, and tomorrow you are going to be stuck wondering, what do I do next? And so whether you have to set 1 goal while we're in this class, or you have to set 3 goals, or you have to put it in the chat box, or you have to email it to us, or put it in the alumni group, whatever it's going to be, set a goal so that tomorrow you don't wake up and let the lies pulverize you into not doing anything at all. Number 2, this comes from my mama. It came right after a breakup that I had 2 summers ago, which then led me into meeting the most beautiful specimen on this planet Earth, Lane Sheets over there. Woo! Let me know if you want Lane to come into the class, because I totally will bring him into the class for his guest appearance. Less words, more work. I mean, I don't know why I'm so lucky to have a mom who okay, wait, can I tell you guys a really funny story? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a funny story. I'm going to come off the screen share to share this funny. Less words, more work. And I shared this. I was preaching at a church in Tampa like 2 weeks ago, and I shared this story. And normally what I do is I say, like, I don't know what I did to deserve the blessing of having a mom that can morph into Jesus and Ellen DeGeneres at any moment. And that's usually the joke that I make. But I made the mistake of preaching from the stage with a Bible in hand about how my mom was actually the love child of Jesus and Ellen DeGeneres, which is so politically incorrect because Jesus didn't have babies and Ellen doesn't want babies with Jesus. But all that to say that I was going through this breakup and I called my mom crying. I'd already gone to Wendy's, gotten my chicken nuggets and my French fries, and she was psychic and was like, you have 1 packet of French fries and then you go back to work. Less words, more work, Hannah. And what she was telling me basically was like, listen, I know that you're going to want to talk about this a lot and process this a lot, and that's really important. But at some point, you're going to have to sit down and you're just going to have to get back to work. And when you get back into the work, I promise you the work is going to heal you. My mom knew that writing is the thing that actually heals me. But there's a very different thing between talking about writing and actually engaging in the writing itself. There's this story that one of my favorite authors talks about the person that constantly sits down at coffee dates and talks about the tree that they one day hope to draw. And every coffee date that they go on, they're like, I'm going to draw a tree one day. I'm going to draw a tree one day, and it's going to have branches and it's going to have leaves. And at some point, somebody needs to stop that person and say, hey, stop talking about the tree and just sit down and draw the tree. And so maybe that's the message that you need to hear this Writing Intensive 2017 on this fine day in August. stop talking about writing and sit down and write. I know I can get a little bit intense and then I feel bad about it, but I'm very firm about this because I know that it will lead you into a better life than a life where we just talk about things and we don't actually do them. And so the last point that I'm going to make from the wise words of Jesus is, on your knees, pray for harvest hands. And I love this because I love this idea that as much as we want to elevate ourselves and we want to build our platforms and build our brands and like do our own writing process, sometimes the best thing that we can do is cheer other people on. We can hope that other people are going to harvest just like we are going to harvest. We can hope that like, hey, we're living in a dark, scary, crazy world sometimes. And so instead of us being the one voice and the one fire, why don't we just pray that more people would be the voice and the fire? And maybe that person is going to get an audience that you never get. And maybe that's not the point of this, that's never going to be something you can control anyway. And so we need to focus on the things we can control rather than getting worried about the things we can't control and we will never have control over. So I just love that idea of like, praying for every person that comes into this class and hoping that you guys will experience a harvest from the things that happen here and being able to cheer that person on if it looks like they might be passing you or lapping you, that's not the point, that we wouldn't get stuck in that comparison, but we would just always hope that one another would win in the hopes that it would make this world a little bit better and a little less darker. So that is I guess that's all the words that I have for this class right now before question and answer. I'm finishing exactly on time as I should, which is fantastic because I've never done this before. This is like a miracle. And so I want to get into talking about the questions that you guys have. So ask your questions, set your goals, and I'm going to start digging in here. Let's see. Okay, we're going to handle all these true crime questions really quickly. Somebody said true crime podcast recommendation if you haven't listened. Oh, they're recommending them to us. Serial, season 1, I agree. Undisclosed, Truth and Justice, Life-Changing, and Addicting. And I will add Up and Vanish to that because Up and Vanish is fantastic. And we went to the live season finale last week and I didn't hate it. Also, thoughts on casting JonBenet. I'm going to have to talk about that outside of the class because I have a lot of words on this Netflix documentary on JonBenet Ramsey. So, Madison, we'll talk post-class. Somebody says, how do I build my brand when I'm still finding out who I am and what I believe? Fantastic question. And I think that it's one of those things where you allow yourself to be able to evolve and change. One of the things that I always recommend to people when they want to become a writer and that's their ultimate goal, and so they start a blog in the hopes of learning to write more, is the best thing that you can do is blog under your own name. Own your name on the internet, if possible at all, whether it is hannahbrencher.com or hannahbrencher.blog, whatever it is, because I've worked with a lot of clients that have come up with a really great blog name, whether that is like The Writer's Tale or Popsicle Mommy or whatever it is, like that puts them into a niche, a lot of mommy bloggers. And what always ends up happening is people say, well, I don't want to be the popsicle mommy anymore. I want to write about different things. I want to write about more than just being a mom. And so the best thing that you can do early on is own your name on the internet and build from there. Because the thing about your name is that maybe it changes because you get married, but you will always allow people to evolve with you and change with you. And when you're blogging under your name, you are allowing yourself to go into different topics that maybe you didn't go into 6 months ago or a year ago. And so if I had waited for the point when I'm like, I need to know what I believe and what I need to put out there, I definitely wouldn't have started blogging 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And I can tell you what I blogged in 2009 looks completely different than what I blog about now. But I will say, one of the greatest gifts of blogging is that it did teach me what I believe in, and it made me really strong in my beliefs, and it made me realize I do have a voice, and that voice holds power, and it changed my life and refined me in some of the best ways, and I would recommend that journey to any person in the world. How do you truly get to know your readers and followers? You stalk them the way they stalk you. I totally stalk people out on Instagram. I totally message them and be like, we should be friends. I find out things they need and then I like mail it to them like in creepy form and fashion. I just get invested in people's lives the way that I get invested in the lives of my friends. I've shown up at baby showers. I've shown up at bridal showers. It was like really creepy 2 nights ago. Me and Lane started watching this show called The Leftovers. And we're watching it and I'm like, I've seen this show before. And he's like, where did you watch this? And I was like, well, this one time I went to a bridal shower for a girl that I didn't know, but I drove 5 hours to get there. And then I creepily was like, I don't want to drive home. So she's like, spend the night with me. And so I spent the night with her and her fiance and we watched that show. But all that to say, like, there's no barring to the people that you can meet on the internet. And that anybody who is a follower is really just a person in real life. And I really wish that we thought about that more, because when you say you want more followers, that means you want the mantle on top of you to become heavier. And that means that more responsibility is going to come. And so I don't know. I'm not perfect at following my followers' lives, but I try really hard to be invested and engaged and to email back when I can. And my assistant also helps a lot with that. And we're really like in it to see people win. And that's our biggest priority. And so I make pockets during my day in which to invest in the people that have invested in me and invested in my words. This is kind of really organic and basic. There's no app for it, which I think is a beautiful thing. There's no app to getting to know people except for Tinder. But just get to know people the old-fashioned way. I don't know. Gosh, I say dumb things. Okay, how do I build a brand with a lack of a following? How do I build something outside of aesthetic boards for my novel? Okay, so when I first started blogging, I had no following whatsoever. I didn't even think following was a word. And then I like blogged for a long time and put it on Facebook, and like I had followers from my college. And then I'll never forget the day that Stephen Coe from the UK showed up and he commented on my blog. And I'm like, who is this man? I don't even know who he is. And then like I threw a little party because I didn't know who he was. And then Emily showed up, and Emily was like one of my second raters. And she actually took my writing intensive last in the winter. And what's crazy is that like you don't need to have a following in order to start. First, you have to build a home if you ever want people to come and join you and eat snacks with you. And so building that place on the internet is the best way to start building and developing a following. But I do have to say it's probably going to be slow and it's going to be monotonous at times. And there are people that buy followers on the internet, and you can do that if that's your jam. But I would say keep it real and keep it with integrity, because you don't need trolls at the end of the day. You need real people. And like people, you know what? I'm just going to say it because I don't know. People, I always like, I'm like, should I say it? Should I not? Maybe somebody has bought followers, and that's fine if you've bought followers, but I have to question what it is that you are seeking to do if you buy fake followers. Like, you need to know what your inner motor is at the end of the day. Are you trying to help people cope with depression? Are you trying to help people see that they're not alone? Are you trying to give people resources for sports management? Are you trying to be like really fantastic in the area of horticulture? Whatever it is not going to happen with fake people following you that don't really care about the things that you're doing. So find people that want to invest in you and then invest in those people. Rant over. And then how do I build something outside of aesthetic boards for my novel? I would challenge you to grab your notebook and just sit and set a timer or plant a tree and say for 25 minutes, I'm going to write. And I don't know what's going to come out of me, but I'm just going to see. And then I'm going to set it for 25 minutes again. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably going to be painful and it's going to feel weird. And I feel like Lane's probably looking at me, but he's not, but he might be, because he knows, he's like, you're going to start writing fiction in the next year. Like that's something you're going to do. And it makes me cringe inside because I can imagine sitting down for the first time that I write fiction, and it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to feel weird, but it might seem noble to create an aesthetic board. But the best thing that you'll ever do to create that novel is to sit down and write the novel. And so for you, Taylor, I would say, set a goal that you can accomplish within the next 30 days and make it a small goal. Say, I want to write the introduction, or I want to write one chapter, and hold yourself to that one goal. Don't say you want to write the whole book in 30 days. NaNoWriMo isn't happening until October. I think it's October. Just set one goal that's achievable and possible, and then come back to me and tell me how that goal went. And even if you don't finish the goal, it's better than not starting anything at all. Awesome. Sweet. Okay. Who are the authors, content creators that have inspired you the most? Let's see. I've got lots of them. I love Donald Miller, and I'm just saying that because he's over here, and I really love this book, Scared Close. I love, love, love Anne Lamott. She is my favorite person in the whole entire world. I love, what? Oh, well, yeah, Flannery O'Connor for sure. She is my favorite. And if you don't know her story, girl wanted to be a writer more than anything. I've got her prayer journal over there, and it's the most raw, real thing. And she's just like, I want to be a writer, God. Like, I just want to be a writer. And she died at the age of 39 of lupus. And she's one of the greatest American writers. And the crazy thing about that is she never got to see half of the impact that she really had. And so you start to ask, maybe following was not the point. Maybe the point was writing the words that shake and shape people's lives 50 years later, 100 years later. So Flannery O'Connor, I love Cheryl Strayed. Gosh, I always blank on this question while I'm doing it. What? Sylvia Plath, yes. To the point that you don't shove your own head in an oven. But I love Sylvia Plath. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just Google how Sylvia Plath died, because it was tragic and she was crazy. She was a fantastic writer, which most writers have a few crazy voices in their heads that if they acted on that, they might be in the oven too. And I'm only saying that because I know that about myself, that I'm a little bit crazy, and Lane knows it too. Joan Didion, also fantastic. Everything that Joan Didion has ever written, you should be willing to read it because it's amazing. So those are just some of my favorite authors that have inspired me in the content that I create. What books have shaped you most as a storyteller? I love Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I am unashamed to say that I love Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I think the book is a masterpiece. It may be sensationalized and there might be a movie to it, but it is a fantastic book. Also, the book Big Magic by Liz Gilbert is also phenomenal. And then, as I said earlier, Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed is one of the most beautiful, raw books about humanity that I've ever come across. And so I like to read things that inspire me to be a better human and push me towards helping other people see the humanity in them. So I read the Modern Love column every single week, and I love to read the New York Times and a lot of the opinion pieces and the nonfiction narrative pieces. So anything, that's human, I'm down to read it. So I write a blog for my students, 17 and 18 years old. How do I get my blog to go beyond that? So I would recommend that if you're writing to a specific audience and you want to expand that audience outward, that's kind of the same thing as the vulnerability hangover. It's bit by bit. It's little by little. It's not taking a left-hand turn towards a specific demographic. It's like being strategic about it and just being okay to embrace those small steps. So maybe trying one post or one point of content that isn't just for 17 and 18-year-olds, but might be able to apply to a 24-year-old. And then write another one. And so not neglecting the demographic that you have and the demographic that is golden to you, but willing to let other people come into the conversation. And the best way to describe that is probably going to be slow. It's going to be steady. It's going to be little by little. But again, the people that read your blog, they're on a journey with you and they're gaining and developing trust with you. And so I wouldn't just left-hand turn everything, forget the 17 and 18-year-olds. This is for the moms now, just let other people come into the conversation naturally. And you kind of expand about the things that you want to write about and the things that you want to talk about. Let me take a drink of water. Hold on one second. Got to water my plant. Okay, I wrote a novel and it is not Christian because when I wrote it, I believed God isn't confined to the insides of a Christian book in order to move. My professor said she finds my social media very pro-God. How do I balance writing secular books and being a Christian and writing about faith on Instagram and my blog? That's a fantastic question. And I would say I don't necessarily believe, and my word is not the opinion that matters above anything else, but I don't necessarily believe that if you write a book that doesn't have Christianity in it, that there's anything wrong with the book. It's the same thing when you sit and you write a novel or you sit and you read a novel that doesn't have God or faith inside of it, and you can still glean something very beautiful about humanity from that novel. And so I would say that the way that I look at faith is like, faith is everything to me and God is everything to me. And so like, I keep in check with like the things that are definitely very anti that. But I still allow myself to create what I want to create and believe that God's in it. I would recommend to you that like you maybe read some Flannery O'Connor if you haven't before, because you will read Flannery O'Connor and you'll be like, some of this is dark and some of this is weird and some of this has versions or like kind of like references to Jesus in it, but I can't really tell. And she's a great classic example of somebody who loved God more than anything, but it wasn't necessarily the thing that was highlighted most in her writing. And she was a completely successful, completely awesome writer. And so I don't know. I think that there can be that balance. I think write what's on your heart to write and don't throw yourself into a box that you build for yourself. Write the things that are coming to your heart, because those are the stories that are meant to be put out there by you, and let somebody else handle the other stuff, but stay true to yourself more than anything. Okay, a sort of logical question. I have a blog that has been 100% dormant for over 2 years. It still means a lot to me and I have a goal to resurrect it. What are your thoughts on starting something completely new with an archive section versus keeping the old space? So I think that you can do both. I think that if you have a blog and you used to blog on it steadily, I would say revive the blog and have an archive section to it. If you're like, I really need to start something new, then I would take all of the archives, I would place them on the blog, and I would completely scrap that blog so that it goes away from the Google searches, so that people aren't finding something from 2014 that hasn't been written on. But I would say if you've got that space and you still like that space, maybe revamp it, change it up a little bit, create the archives page, and then I would say write a letter to your readers to say, hey, I've been gone for 2 years and I'm coming back. And so I just wanted to let you know I'm still hanging out in this space and things are about to get real. Okay. How do you know if God has called you to write and has given you that ability? I think it's one of those things where it's like people talk about calling a lot, and I'm a big advocate for like your calling is wherever you are in this moment right here. And so if you feel this desire to write and it keeps knocking at your door, then sit down and start to write and see what happens. But that if we are always focusing on callings that are 5 years in the future or 10 years in the future, sometimes that becomes an excuse to never start right where we are. If you're going to be a writer 5 years from now, the best thing you can do is to start to hone in those skills right now. And so part of me is like, you're here in this class, you're here, you're qualified. And so start writing, like consider that like a call and answer the call and take that first step. Also, not God, so I can't speak for him. So yeah. Okay. Whew. These are great questions. How do we eliminate the negative liar people in our lives without perpetuating the cruelty, i.e. be kind about it? It's a term that I've called recently that I've learned recently that's called detachment, which means that like you don't have to ignore them. You don't need to push them out of your life for good. You don't have to wish ill for them, but you need to be careful to take care of yourself more than you care about an image of yourself or care about that person's feelings, in the sense that like if they're being mean to you and if they're lying to you and if they're being really negative, like you should be like turning their volume button down a little bit, and you should be going to find more positive people. You can come hang out with me and I'll kick your butt. But why do I say dumb stuff all the time? All that to say, I think that it doesn't mean you have to cut those people out of your life entirely, but you have to realize at some point that you matter and the thoughts that get put into your head matter. And do I want those thoughts to be negative or do I want them to be positive? And you control that. You can't control who's going to speak into your life, but you can control how high you turn the volume up when they go to talk. Boom. Okay. How do we balance our priorities? I want to write, that is for me, but our responsibilities and commitments in my life that involve outside influence. I often let them feed an excuse not to write because I can't be my mind's assumption of selfish with my time. Does this make sense? I think it totally makes sense, right? Like we want to do something, but then we feel like it's selfish because we have other commitments. And so what matters and what is the priorities. And I think that at some point, like, while it is very important to honor the commitments that you've made and still go to your job and still do work, at some point, if something matters to you, you have to be willing to make it a priority, whether that is 20 minutes of your day, whether that is an hour of your day, whether that is an hour of your week. We have to be willing to make that a priority. No one's going to be able to come along and make that a priority for you. Lane can't sit down and do the writing for me. He can't turn something into a priority for me. I have to get over all of the excuses in my brain, one of them that I'm being selfish or that I could be doing better things with my time, and just realize, like, at the end of my life, what would break my heart, and only my heart, if I didn't create it and if I didn't produce it. The person beside you, your neighbor, is not going to be heartbroken over the things you didn't create. That's on you. And so you're going to have your own funeral for that stuff. And so we either sit down and we make our priorities and we follow through with them, or we don't. And I think that's getting past the excuses, at least to try and see what's standing there on the other side. So, says, Taylor Swifting would love to write about my 9-year journey of becoming a parent, infertility, fostering, adopting, 6-month camper van road trip with my new fam. I want to protect her anonymity. That's the main reason I haven't started. I want to find that sweet spot you're talking about. And so I think that there is a few things. I think it's like being careful to tell your story and share your story, and, being mindful that, like, you can never speak for another person. But at the same time, I would also say that, like, you can be able to tell a story and change identifying details about a person. You can change different parts of their identity to protect them and to protect yourself. I've done it in my first book. I changed names, I changed identifying characteristics, and that's just because sometimes you're not going to be able to get around certain topics. But again, like I said, I think it's really important to reach a point in your heart where you're not writing out of bitterness and you're not writing out of anger and you're not writing to prove a point. You're writing simply because somebody changed you and changed your life, and you want to be able to share that. And if you're still feeling really insecure about that writing, again, I would say finding a person to read your words that will be an honest critic towards you is one of the best things. It's going to be hard, but you got to tell that person, I want you to be brutally honest with me. I need you to be brutally honest with me. Okay. I love all the book recommendations. What are some of your faves that deal specifically deal with the writing process or discipline of writing? Again, I'll recommend this one because it's fantastic, The Power of Habit. And I did talk about Bird by Bird and Lamont. That one is fantastic. There is a book by Don Miller called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And that is a fantastic book about storytelling and the process of storytelling. And then I'll also recommend the book On Writing by Stephen King. Also a fantastic, phenomenal book. And then sometimes I just Google things. I Google interviews with my favorite writers to see what they have to say. I look up the process of writing for Joan Didion or Maya Angelou. And people that inspire me, I seek to know as much as I can know about their process and their creation methods. I think Paulo Coelho, that wrote The Alchemist, he has this crazy thing where he will sit down and he will write a book every 2 years. And he sits there for 2 weeks straight, doesn't do anything else but write this book. And then when he finishes, he stops for another 2 years. He doesn't write anything else. And then he comes back to it for 2 weeks. And this is his process. And I'm like, that's amazing. He can write a book in 2 weeks, which means I can write a book in 2 weeks. I think it's Mark Batterson that has a goal to write 15 books in 10 years. Or 10 books in 15 years, one of those, I don't know. It's a lot of books. And so I think if other people have been able to gain this discipline, I know I can totally build that discipline for myself. I was speaking, like I said, at a church in Tampa 2 weeks ago, and I was so inspired that the lead pastor, I found out from somebody that the lead pastor had his messages studied, prayed out, and written all the way into spring of 2018. He had every single sermon ready to go. And I was like, that is the coolest form of discipline I've ever seen. And like, it made a goal in my heart to be like, I want that discipline. And so I made the goal, like, I want to have all of my Monday morning emails written out through December. And I started working on that goal this week, and I wrote all of my Monday morning emails for August. And can I tell you, it's been a fantastic weekend knowing that I don't have that email looming over my head. But just to know that if other people have discipline, you can cultivate that same discipline and create things. And writing really is just about discipline. I am convinced of it. Yes, you have to be creative and imaginative, but it all comes down to discipline. How do you balance writing about the hard stuff and by extension of that, feeling through the hard stuff without falling into the dark place you may have been at when you were in that? I definitely think you have to be like aware of how you feel and aware of the things that might trigger you or make you kind of feel uneasy or maybe feel anxious or depressed. But I also think that the best thing or the best reason that we write about some of the dark things that have happened to us is because we've come out on the other side of them and we've learned the lessons, and we want to offer that wisdom and that valuable information to other people. And so when I'm in that space of writing about those things, well, I might have weird memories or I might feel a little bit uncomfortable. I just remember like the end goal of this is that I'm not in that place anymore. I've come out of that and I've learned stuff. And so hopefully my words can help somebody else who's in that space who also wants to come out of the woods. How do you feel about setting deadlines for yourself and looking at writing as a discipline? Is it good to have those self-imposed deadlines, or does it make the writing more stressful? I think deadlines are always a great thing. And I think sharing deadlines with other people is really important, because sometimes you will realize like, well, it's just me and my own deadline. So it doesn't matter if I don't make that deadline. I'm only disappointing myself. And so that's why sometimes I think it's good to put things out there on the internet and to hold yourself accountable to it. I think sometimes that's why, like, when people create like, a fitness account on Instagram, that like they are able to like crush these crazy fitness goals because they put themselves out there, and it basically is making them accountable. And so I definitely think setting deadlines is important, but I also think like not doing it in isolation, bringing somebody into that with you and helping and asking them to help keep you accountable. It goes back to that whole find people who want to see you win. And again, this is the time to go into the comment box and say, I need a writing accountability partner who's out there for me. Okay. How do you know books are what you were meant to write? Not just a blog, not just letters. I think that like that comes down to like, first you start writing and then you realize, okay, I wrote 700 words. That would either be a blog post or a vignette or a little. Then you kind of graduate to a novella, and then you might graduate to a novel. I think that it's all training yourself to write for long periods of time. And so it might start with 1,000 words and then 3,000 words. And then gradually it ends up being 60,000 words. And so I think with books, like it's incredibly hard because like you stare at the page and you think, how am I supposed to write 60 to 70,000 words? But if the story is there, then you learn to stretch the story. You build out the tentpole moments and you start to write little by little. I will say this is not a plug at all, but I do offer another course that's coming in November on my site that is called the Year of the Book. And that is specifically a course on book writing, because I do think book writing is a completely different beast than just like writing the discipline of writing in general. Whew. Okay. A few more questions. How are we doing out there? We're doing good? We're almost there. We've almost hit the finish line. Someone said, you mentioned becoming before communicating. I'm there right now. What suggestions would you give to people who are gaining the life experience they need to before they write about things? I'm trying to discern at what point in the journey I should share and when I should hold off. I think that the most valuable thing that we can all have is old-fashioned diaries and journals. I think that the diary and the journal existed before the internet did. And so sometimes instead of feeling something and putting it on Facebook, we can go to our diary or go to an Evernote the way that I do and write your things out and polish your things up before you want to put them out there into the world. I think we have enough inside of us where we know when we've gotten over something or we've gotten over the hump of something or we've learned the tough lesson about something. And so I would just listen to that like gut check inside of you that tells you when it's time to share something and when it isn't. And again, bringing a friend into the process, because sometimes when you feel nauseous about something, you feel like that's your indication that you shouldn't post it. And in reality, sometimes when you feel really nauseous about something, that is your indication that you should post it and you should put it out there. Sometimes if things make you want to vomit, you should do them. But yeah, I'm a big proponent for becoming something before you communicate it. When I was in the thick of the depression in 2014, I didn't write a single thing about it. And that seems really weird because you could go onto my blog and you couldn't even see a trace of my depression apart from sometimes the sadder tone that I was writing in. But I didn't end up writing about that depression until months after it, when I had dealt with it, when I had learned the lessons and I felt ready to communicate it. And even then, it was one simple blog post that only referenced it shortly before I felt like I could write about it in a long form fashion. And so don't put it out there before it's ready. And that's not because you don't want to affect other people. It's because you don't want to affect yourself. Don't put something out there until you feel like you've actually dealt with it, or you are dealing with it and you feel like you are in a healthy space. Okay, a few more questions and then that's it, guys. Have you been having a good time at the writing intensive? I am getting all stuffed up. So where do you go, or where do you know where to start? Do you wait for inspiration or go in search of it? I used to be the person that only blogged when I felt inspired, or only wrote when I felt inspired. And then I kind of had to kick that habit because I realized, like, if we're always waiting on inspiration, then there will be months where we don't write anything at all. And so I would recommend to you that you get into the practice of sitting down and sitting at the space in which you want to write some really good words at. And even if nothing comes, or even if only like 10 words come, or even if you surprise yourself and a whole entire chapter comes out, it's the practice of sitting down and waiting on those words to come. Sometimes I read other blogs that inspire me. I go to the Modern Love column and I start reading things, and then something will trigger something that will allow me to start writing. But most of the time, what I'll do is I will sit down, I'll do my writing, and I will stop at a point where I know it will be easier to pick up the next day. And so whether that's mid-sentence, or it's like I know what the next paragraph is, or I know what the next chapter is and I set it out the night before, I always set it up so that I am easily able to walk into the writing process the next day. It never gets any easier. Writing is like going to the gym. You never actually want to go, but you're always happy that you went. Okay. I think that I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to call it a day, guys. First writing intensive ever that has ended on time. Crazy. Let's see. Going back. Okay, this one is a small one. It says, I love Pinterest. Do you, even though it has so many great ideas, I struggle with Pinterest because it's a lot of pinning things you want to do and don't ever do. Do you struggle with this? Pinterest is great until it's just 10 boards of things you never do. Amen. That's great. Turn that into a graphic. Yeah, I think that's a perfect note to end on, is that don't turn your life into a Pinterest board that you never execute. Let's put that on a coffee cup and then turn it into a t-shirt or something. I think that is the danger of the world that we live in, is that we can be people that talk a lot about the things that we do, but we never actually do them. When I pin things, I generally try to make them happen. And Lane knows this because I annoy the crap out of him probably with all the recipes that I try to create that don't ever look like they do on Pinterest. But all that to say that at some point, I think we have to stop pinning the work of other people, and we just need to start creating our own. Create something that's pin-worthy, if you want to be cliche about it. But at some point, like I said, it's like being willing to stop binging on the blogs, to stop reading all the books, to finally get to the point where you're like, okay, you know what? I'm ready to begin. I'm ready to begin. And I don't actually need the inspiration of that person and that person and that person and that person. I just need to get into it and create my own process and mess up and fail and try over and do better. And it's your process at the end of the day. I think about writing and what it probably looked like 20 years ago. It wasn't like just pinning a bunch of things until we felt ready to write, or making an aesthetic board, or reading a bunch of books on writing. You know, it's like at some point we have to be willing to say, like, less of the inspiration and more of me sitting down and just seeing what comes out of me. That might be the scariest thing you ever do. That might be the hardest thing you ever do, but I promise you it's worth it and it's going to be yours. And that's the number one thing in this world that sometimes gets stolen from us, is that sometimes we don't even live in the moment long enough for it to be ours. We're so consumed with just putting it out there for the world to consume it. And so take back more moments that are yours. And I can promise you, during the 5 a.m. hours or the 7 p.m. hours or whenever it is you sit down to write, that progress is going to be slow and sometimes it's going to be unsteady. But I can promise you, it is going to be yours. It's going to belong to you. And that is going to be more fulfilling of a feeling than 100 or 200 or 1,000 likes on Instagram or 1,000 pins. So go out into the world and create your process and make your progress and know that at the end of the day, that belongs to you. It is yours and no one can take that from you. So I think that's a good note to end on. And I'm so excited that you guys came to this writing intensive and spent 3 hours with me. I will be sending a link this weekend for you guys to join the alumni Facebook group. Come powwow with some other people. We got some cute writer boys in there, so somebody should fall in love. And yeah, I'm always looking for a great love story. I'm always trying to do some matchmaking. Lane, do you want to come say hi to everybody? Come make your appearance. Look at everyone. Hey, this is Lane. Any questions for Lane? I don't know. Let's see if anybody asks you questions. There's like a 60-second lag, so it'll take a minute. So you're just going to have to
just stare at everyone here.
Yeah, you want to like bend down a little bit. So there's going to be an alumni group. There's going to be an alumni Facebook group. And I'm going to be emailing, or actually you guys are going to get the recording, but I will also email the presentation to you guys. People says, hi, Lane. What do you do, Lane? Tell us what you do.
I work in finance for a home building company.
Oh my gosh, look at it. You're so cute. You look so cute.
Oh, thank you.
He's finance and I'm words. That's probably why we work. Thanks for sharing your wife with us. Look at it.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, we have a good time. Lane is like the number one. Okay, so I'm going to be emailing you the link to get involved with the Facebook page. Don't feel obligated. If you feel like you don't need another Facebook group, then don't join the Facebook group. I'm going to link the presentation. If you've got questions, if you want to email us, info@hannahbrencher.com. And I hope that you guys enjoy your Saturday. Have a good day. This is the first time you and I are both signing out together. You want to wave together? Like, bye, everyone. See you guys later.
Peace out.